Inside the Vatican's private papal study, Pope Leo XIV held an 81-year-old letter in his trembling hands. The envelope had remained sealed since 1944, hidden in a secret compartment within the Vatican archives. It had been written by Sister Lucia dos Santos, the nun who claimed to have witnessed the apparitions of the Virgin Mary in Fatima. But that was not the third secret that the world knew about. It was the part she could never reveal, the part she was commanded to keep hidden until the right pope arrived. As Leo XIV's eyes slowly scanned the ink faded by time, his face lost its color. The letter described him with impossible precision. A pope born in the United States, a member of the Order of St. Augustine, the first of his kind in the history of the Church. Then he read the prophecy that left him motionless for 6 long seconds. A cardinal whose name means strength will rise to oppose you. The truth you reveal will reopen the wound between Catholics and Orthodox, a wound that has been bleeding for 1,000 years. Cardinal Raymond Burke. His surname literally means strength. What Cardinal Burke did next was something no one saw coming. If you want to discover how this 1,000-year battle ends, leave a comment saying where you are watching us from, and subscribe now to channel, because what is about to happen will leave you breathless. Now, to fully understand the magnitude of this drama, we must return to the beginning, to the morning that set everything in motion. What began as a routine task inside the Vatican archives ended up becoming a discovery with implications capable of changing the future of the Church, not just as a historical curiosity, but as a reminder of how the most unexpected findings can challenge our understanding of faith, unity, and God's mysterious timing in a world where divisions seem impossible to heal. Monsignor Giuseppe Trevi had been working in the Vatican Apostolic Archives for 23 years. At 62 years old, he represented the perfect image of a dedicated, meticulous archivist who was absolutely faithful to protocols. For over 2 decades, he had spent his days cataloging ancient documents, preserving fragile manuscripts, and protecting some of the most delicate records in the history of the Church: papal letters, theological treatises, accounts of mystical experiences, and testimonies preserved for centuries. He moved between the endless corridors of the archives like a monk in prayer, slow, respectful, precise. Each document was treated with the same reverence with which others would treat a sacred relic. One could see in his careful gestures the quiet devotion of a man who had given his life to safeguarding the Church's memory, often wondering in silent moments whether these fragile pages still carried living voices from the past. That morning seemed like a normal day, until an unexpected incident occurred. During the night, a pipe had burst in the east wing of the building. The damage was not severe, but it was enough to force Trevi and his small team to move several boxes of documents belonging to the pontificate of Pius XII, historical materials dating from the 1920s and 1930s, an era marked by wars, political crises, and changes that transformed the world. As they carefully moved the boxes toward a safe area, Trevi noticed something strange. One of the old wooden drawers looked different. The proportions did not fit. The base did not rest correctly on the floor. It was a subtle anomaly, but for a man who had handled thousands of historical containers during his career, that was enough to arouse suspicion. He knelt down and slowly ran his fingers along the bottom edges, searching for any irregularity or hidden mechanism. Then he pressed a corner. A small creak was heard, and the wood gave way. The false bottom opened slowly, revealing a secret compartment that had remained sealed for over 80 years. Trevi felt his breath stop. Inside, there was a single envelope, nothing more, sealed with red wax and marked with a papal stamp from 1944. A year in which Europe was burning under the flames of World War II. But it was not the stamp that caught his attention, it was the handwriting. He recognized it immediately, the elegant and delicate handwriting of Sister Lucia dos Santos, the very same girl who decades earlier had claimed to have seen the Virgin Mary in Fatima alongside her cousins, an event that changed the history of Marian devotion for millions of people around the world. However, what made Trevi's hands tremble was not the envelope. It was the small note attached to it. He read it once, then again, and a third time. Each reading seemed more impossible than the last. The words read, "The words I could not write," in the first letter about the third secret. Trevi felt his heart pounding heavily in his chest. The third secret of Fatima was one of the greatest mysteries in the modern history of the Church. Officially, it had been revealed by the Vatican in the year 2000. It described the vision of a bishop dressed in white, suffering a violent attack. Many interpreted that vision as a reference to the assassination attempt on St. John Paul II in 1981. But for decades, rumors circulated, rumors assuring that the story was not complete, that Sister Lucia had hidden part of the message, that there was something more that had not yet been revealed. And now in his hands, Trevi held proof that seemed to confirm those suspicions, proof capable of rewriting decades of speculation. He understood immediately that he could not share that discovery with anyone, not even with his colleagues or his immediate superiors. Only one person in the entire Vatican had the authority to open that envelope: the Pope, the successor of St. Peter, the custodian of the Church's deepest secrets. With extreme care, he sealed the area, placed the envelope inside a special protective case, and began walking down the long marble corridors leading to the papal apartments. As he moved forward, a question kept echoing in his mind. What had Sister Lucia really written 81 years ago? And even more importantly, why had it remained hidden until now? Monsignor Trevi could still feel his hands trembling when he arrived in front of the door of Pope Leo XIV's private study. He took a deep breath and then knocked. From inside, a calm voice was heard. "Come in." The Pope received him immediately. The room perfectly reflected the character of Leo XIV. There were no excessive luxuries, no ostentatious decoration, only a simple wooden cross hanging on the wall, a small library filled with theological texts, and an image of Our Lady of Good Counsel resting beside a lit lamp. Everything conveyed serenity, prayer, and humility. Trevi advanced slowly, holding the protective case with both hands. His voice was barely a whisper. "Holy Father, I found this in the archives." The Pope looked up. Trevi placed the case on the desk. It was hidden in a secret compartment since 1944. The seal is still intact. The handwriting belongs to Sister Lucia dos Santos. Leo XIV observed the envelope for several seconds, without saying a word. Then he asked, "And what does the note say?" Trevi swallowed hard. "It says it contains the words that Sister Lucia could not include in her first letter about the third secret of Fatima." Inside the dimly lit papal study, a heavy silence filled the room, as though even time itself had paused in reverence and anticipation. Pope Leo XIV reached for the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, his fingers tracing the brittle edges of the old red wax seal. It had remained untouched for more than 8 decades. No one had dared open it. No one had read its contents. Until this very moment. With a slow, deliberate motion, he broke the seal. The ancient wax gave way with a soft, almost reluctant crack. Monsignor Trevi stood nearby in respectful silence, fully aware that he was witnessing a moment that would echo through history. The Pope carefully withdrew a single sheet of paper, yellowed by time, yet remarkably clear. At the top, in Sister Lucia's unmistakable handwriting, appeared the date, January 3rd, 1944. Leo XIV began to read, and almost immediately his expression shifted. His eyes widened, his breathing grew quieter and more deliberate. Trevi could sense the weight descending upon him. Then the Pope read aloud in a low, measured voice, "I write out of obedience to Our Lady, who commanded me to reveal the words I could not include in my first letter about the third secret. The world was not prepared to hear them." Trevi felt a chill run through him. The Pope continued, his voice barely above a whisper, But she showed me that a time would come when an Augustinian pope born in America would reveal the complete truth. Leo XIV paused, visibly moved, as if the words had struck him personally. For a brief moment, he seemed unable to go on. Trevi understood at once. The letter was describing him with eerie accuracy. An American pope, the first of his kind, and a son of the Order of St. Augustine. Written 81 years before his election, long before he was even born, the prophecy had waited patiently across generations for this very man. Gathering himself, the Pope read on. Each line deepened the solemn tension in the room. Our Lady showed me a vision beyond the bishop dressed in white. I saw two lungs of the church, one in the west and one in the east. Both were trying to breathe together. He continued slowly, his voice carrying both awe and burden. For 1,000 years they have remained separated. The Catholic lung and the Orthodox lung belong to the same body, but they no longer breathe as one. Leo XIV lowered the page for a moment, his eyes reflecting the immense sorrow of a millennium of division since the Great Schism of 1054. The pain of that separation, the failed attempts at healing, and the lingering wounds all seemed to press upon him in that quiet instant. The letter went on. Our Lady showed me that during the time of the American pastor, a door would open. The Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church will receive one final opportunity to achieve unity. The words lingered in the air like a sacred promise. Yet the next lines brought a deeper unease. However, that unity will come at a price. Reconciliation will require the revelation of a truth that both sides have concealed. A truth about me, about my role, about my mission, about my place within the divine plan. Leo XIV fell silent, his face clouded with the knowledge of where this was leading. It touched upon one of the most delicate and controversial questions in modern theology, one centered on the Virgin Mary herself, a matter capable of stirring both profound devotion and painful division even among Catholics. As he continued reading, the gravity of the message only grew. Trevi watched every subtle change in the Pope's expression, every flicker of emotion, feeling as though he were witnessing a man confronting a destiny written long before his time. The weight in the room was palpable, the air thick with the sense that something far larger than either of them was unfolding. And still the letter had not yet reached its most difficult and dangerous revelation. Pope Leo XIV steadied his gaze on the page once more. The only sound was the faint rustle of paper between his fingers. Monsignor Trevi remained perfectly still, heart-pounding, knowing in his soul that he stood in the presence of something extraordinary. Then came the words that shook the very foundations. The truth that will be revealed will reopen ancient wounds. Many will reject it. Some will call it heresy. Trevi felt a shiver run down his spine. But it was the next line that truly changed everything. The one that left the Pope motionless for 6 long seconds, his face a portrait of solemn resolve mixed with quiet sorrow, and a cardinal, whose name means strength, will rise to oppose the Pope who dares to speak. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Leo XIV stopped reading. His eyes remained fixed on those words, without moving, without blinking, 6 full seconds. Trevi would never forget that moment, because he could see that the Pope had just understood something that had struck him like lightning. Finally, he looked up. His face had lost its color. My God! Trevi swallowed hard. What is it, Holy Father? Leo XIV did not answer immediately. He looked back at the letter and read the next line. He will believe he is defending the faith. He will believe he is protecting the truth, but only through the wound will healing come. The Pope closed his eyes for an instant. Then he whispered a name. Burke. Trevi watched him, confused. Cardinal Raymond Burke. Leo XIV nodded slowly. His surname means strength. Silence filled the room once more. It was impossible to ignore the coincidence. Raymond Burke was one of the most influential cardinals in the Church, known for his firm defense of traditional doctrine, respected by millions of Catholics around the world, and also known for publicly expressing his disagreements when he deemed it necessary. The Pope looked back at the letter. Each new phrase seemed to increase the weight of the situation. Only through the wound can healing arrive. Only through the rupture can unity be born. Trevi felt that those words carried a strange power, as if they were speaking of something much greater than a simple theological debate. Leo XIV continued reading. The letter described a divided church. A church unable to breathe fully, a church wounded by a separation dating back nearly 1,000 years. Then an image appeared that completely captured the Pope's attention. I saw 2 lungs, one in the west and one in the east. Both belonged to the same body, but they did not breathe together. Leo XIV remained thoughtful. That image was not new. St. John Paul II had used a similar expression decades ago. He had spoken of a church called to breathe with 2 lungs, the Catholic and the Orthodox. But complete unity never arrived. Despite decades of dialogue, despite historic meetings, despite countless efforts, the wound remained open. And according to that letter, the solution was tied to a truth that had not yet been fully understood, a truth related to the Virgin Mary. Leo XIV read again, Our Lady showed me that the final opportunity for unity will arrive during the time of the American pastor. Trevi watched as the Pope gripped the paper slightly. It was impossible to ignore the meaning of those words. American pastor, American Pope, Augustinian. Everything seemed to point directly at him, as if Sister Lucia had written that letter thinking of him, or as if she had seen something decades before it happened. The tension inside the room was almost palpable. Trevi finally gathered the courage to ask, What will you do now, Holy Father? The Pope remained quiet, looking at the wooden cross hanging on the wall. Several seconds passed. Then he replied, I still do not know. His voice was calm, but it also reflected concern, because he fully understood the implications. If the letter was authentic, if his interpretation was correct, then it was not merely a prophecy. It was a mission that could change the future of the Church or divide it even further. Trevi watched as the Pope reread the last part of the page. And it was then that a phrase appeared that left him even more uneasy. A phrase that sounded like a warning. A phrase that neither of them could shake from their minds. Both paths will lead to a crisis, but only one will fulfill heaven's plan. The room fell completely silent because that phrase posed a terrifying question. If both paths led to a crisis, which was the right path? And even more importantly, what price would the person who decided to walk it have to pay? While Pope Leo XIV remained silent inside his private study, events began to move outside those walls. Secrets rarely remain hidden for long in the Vatican, and this would be no exception. Although the Holy Father had requested absolute discretion, some rumors began to circulate among certain trusted officials. At first, they were mere whispers, brief comments, questions asked in low voices. There was talk of an old letter, of a document found in the archives, of a prophecy related to Fatima. Nothing concrete, nothing confirmed, but enough to awaken curiosity. As the hours passed, the rumors reached increasingly influential people and finally reached one of the best-known men inside the Church, Cardinal Raymond Burke. Burke had a long reputation as a firm defender of traditional doctrine. He was respected by millions of the faithful, admired by those who valued doctrinal clarity, and also criticized by those who considered his positions too rigid. However, even his detractors acknowledged one thing. When Burke spoke, people listened. That afternoon, he received fragmented information. He did not know the complete content of the letter, nor did he know exactly what it said. But he did hear certain details. A hidden message from Sister Lucia, a reference to unity between Catholics and Orthodox, and a possible controversy related to the Virgin Mary. That was enough to capture his attention completely. The cardinal remained thoughtful for several minutes. He knew that topics like those could provoke enormous debates within the Church, especially when related to delicate theological matters. Meanwhile, in the papal study, Leo XIV kept reading. Each page seemed to add a new layer of complexity. The letter offered no easy answers. On the contrary, it raised difficult questions capable of dividing opinions even among the most experienced theologians. Monsignor Trevi kept watching without interrupting, without asking questions, waiting. Finally, the Pope spoke. "This letter is not merely a prophecy." Trevi looked up. "What do you mean, Holy Father?" Leo XIV looked back at the document. "It is also a warning." The answer hung in the air, because that was precisely what worried him most. The letter did not describe a simple path, did not promise an immediate solution, did not promise reconciliation without suffering. On the contrary, it constantly spoke of wounds, of trials, of opposition, of sacrifices. And the further the reading progressed, the more evident a reality became. Any decision would have consequences. The question was, which ones? Evening began to fall over Rome. The light coming through the windows grew dimmer. The study was wrapped in an even more solemn atmosphere. Then, the Pope reached another important fragment. He read slowly, analyzing every word, and the further he went, the more he understood that this situation was far from being a simple historical discovery, for the letter suggested something unsettling. That the true conflict had not yet begun, that the opposition foretold by the prophecy was yet to manifest, that the events described were only just beginning. Leo XIV rested the letter on the desk, looked at the cross hanging on the wall, and remained silent for several seconds. Afterward, he said something that surprised Trevi. "This is not just about me, nor Burke, nor even the Catholic Church." Trevi looked at him, confused. "Then what is it about?" The Pope answered slowly, "It is about the future." Those words left a deep silence in the room, because both understood that decisions made in the coming months could influence entire generations, not only in Rome, not only in the West, but across the entire Christian world. And while the Holy Father meditated on those possibilities, the news kept spreading. More and more people were beginning to hear rumors about a mysterious letter found in the Vatican archives, a letter written by Sister Lucia, a letter that had remained hidden for over 80 years, a letter that, according to some comments, contained words that had never been revealed to the world. And somewhere in Rome, Cardinal Raymond Burke was beginning to ask questions that would soon lead him directly into the center of the storm. Because if the prophecy was true, the confrontation foretold decades ago was about to begin. The following morning began with a strange feeling inside the Vatican. There was no official announcement, no press release, no public statement. And yet, the tension was evident. Something was happening, and those who worked near the decision centers could feel it. Pope Leo XIV continued meeting with absolute trusted advisors, theologians, historians, experts in relations between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. He was not looking for a quick answer. He was seeking to understand all possible implications. Every conversation seemed to lead to the same conclusion. The letter was extraordinary, not because of its age, not because of its origin, but because of the moment in which it had appeared, for it described a situation that seemed to be unfolding right before their eyes. Meanwhile, Cardinal Raymond Burke kept quietly investigating. He had managed to confirm several important details. The letter genuinely came from the Vatican archives. Its preliminary authenticity seemed solid, and, most unsettling of all, its content was related to extremely sensitive topics. Burke began to worry, not because he feared a theological discussion. Theological discussions had always existed. What worried him was something else. The possibility that a supposed prophecy might be used to influence complex doctrinal matters. That was why he decided to act with prudence. Before passing any judgment, before making any statement, he needed to gather more information. But at the same time, he felt that something important was approaching. something that could mark the future of the Church for generations. As night fell over Rome, the situation began to change. The rumors were no longer circulating merely among archivists or officials. Now they were reaching the highest levels of the Church, cardinals, bishops, advisors close to the Vatican. They were beginning to hear fragments of the same story, a hidden letter, a prophecy related to Fatima, and a message that apparently spoke about the future of Christian unity. No one knew all the details, but curiosity was growing rapidly. Among those trying to discover the truth was Cardinal Raymond Burke. That night, he received more concrete information. It was not a copy of the letter. It was not the complete text, but it was enough to confirm something important. The letter existed. It had truly been found, and Pope Leo XIV was studying it personally. Burke remained in silence for several minutes, looking out the window of his residence, reflecting, praying, thinking carefully about the possible implications. He knew the theological debates related to Christian unity all too well. He had spent decades studying Catholic doctrine, and he knew that certain questions could cause deep divisions, especially those related to the authority of the Church, tradition, and the figure of the Virgin Mary. Meanwhile, Pope Leo XIV continued meeting with some of his closest advisors in the quiet hours that followed. He did not reveal every detail of the letter, but he shared enough to convey its profound weight, explaining that its contents demanded careful, prayerful reflection. The experts listened with rapt attention. Some showed visible surprise, others quiet concern, yet all recognized the same truth. The situation was extraordinarily delicate. A single misinterpreted phrase could sow confusion among the faithful, while any rushed decision might unleash consequences no one could fully predict. The more they examined the text together, the clearer one central theme became: unity, reconciliation, and healing. These words appeared repeatedly, as if forming the beating heart of the message. Yet another word surfaced again and again, an unsettling one: crisis. The letter warned plainly that the road to reconciliation would be difficult, marked by resistance, opposition, and widely differing interpretations. Leo XIV understood this all too well. Church history was rich with sincere believers reaching opposing conclusions, each convinced they were defending the truth, only to see conflicts deepen and wounds linger. That night, sleep came with difficulty. Sister Lucia's words echoed persistently in his mind, especially the image of two paths, two possible futures, and the heavy burden of a single, irreversible choice. Before dawn, he returned once more to the private chapel. There, he knelt before the crucifix for a long time, not seeking instant answers, but the quiet clarity that comes only through patient discernment, humility, and surrender. In the stillness, one could sense the deep loneliness and profound responsibility resting upon his shoulders. Several kilometers away, Cardinal Burke was reaching a decision of his own. He had heard the growing rumors and received enough troubling reports to know he could no longer remain on the sidelines. He needed to know the truth directly. What exactly the letter contained, and why it had stirred such visible anxiety among those closest to the Holy Father. That choice would prove a turning point. From then on, events would accelerate rapidly. What had remained carefully guarded within the Vatican's walls was about to touch the life of the entire Church. When Burke finally learned the details of the prophecy, his reaction would surprise even those who thought they knew him best. In the papal study, Leo XIV returned to a particular fragment of the letter, reading it once more. The words seemed to gain fresh meaning with every glance. The opportunity will come only once. Many will not recognize it. Many will reject it out of fear. Those lines lingered in his thoughts for hours. An opportunity for what? For unity, for genuine reconciliation, or for something even deeper and more transformative? The uncertainty weighed heavily on him, for no one could offer simple certainty. Millions looked to the Church for clarity in troubled times, not further confusion or division. Yet, he also knew from history that the Church's most pivotal moments had rarely been easy. They were often accompanied by intense debate, sincere doubt, painful resistance, and personal sacrifice. This time, it seemed, would be no different. That afternoon, reports reached him of rising speculation in religious media. Some outlets spoke of a new Fatima revelation. Others sensed an emerging internal conflict. Most guesses were inaccurate, yet the mere fact that rumors were spreading confirmed an unavoidable reality. The secret could not remain hidden forever. Sooner or later, it would need to be addressed openly. When that day came, every word would be scrutinized, every decision questioned, and every step would carry lasting consequences. Understanding this, Leo XIV moved forward with caution, deep prayer, and measured patience. Outside the study, however, events continued to unfold. Cardinal Burke had finally obtained more precise information about the letter, enough to grasp why so many were deeply troubled. When he finished listening to the report, his expression changed noticeably. For the first time, he realized the situation was far more serious than he had imagined, stirring a complex mix of conviction, concern, and resolve within him. What he discovered forced him to make a decision that would very soon place him face to face with Pope Leo XIV, exactly as it seemed to have been foretold decades earlier. And when both men met face to face, the prophecy would begin to unfold in a way that no one expected. The report reached Cardinal Raymond Burke at the end of the afternoon. He read it in silence, without interruptions, without comments. When he finished, he slowly rested the pages on the desk and remained motionless for several seconds. Now he understood why the discovery was generating so much disquiet within the Vatican. The letter was not simply a historical document or a curiosity related to Fatima, nor was it just any spiritual reflection. According to the reports he had received, the prophecy contained direct references to the future of the Church, to the unity between Catholics and Orthodox, and to a figure that seemed to coincide with himself. That was precisely what worried him most. Burke was a deeply rational man. He had dedicated his entire life to the study of doctrine. He knew that the Church had to act with extreme prudence when dealing with private revelations, even when they came from figures as renowned as Sister Lucia. For that reason, he decided not to react impulsively. He needed to hear directly from the Pope. He needed to understand exactly how he was interpreting that letter. Above all, he needed to know what he planned to do. Meanwhile, Leo XIV continued to reflect on the document's content. Every time he reread it, he found new nuances, new questions, and new concerns. One phrase in particular kept calling his attention, a phrase that seemed to be connected to everything else. "Many will defend the truth, but few will understand the totality of the plan." Those words were difficult to interpret because they suggested something complex. That sincere people could find themselves on opposite sides of the same conflict, that they could act convinced that they were doing the right thing, and yet still reach different conclusions. It was an uncomfortable idea, but a deeply human one. The history of the Church was filled with similar examples, and that made the current situation even more delicate. That night, Leo XIV decided to convene new private consultations. He wanted to hear more opinions, more perspectives, and more analysis, not because he doubted the importance of the letter, but because he understood the enormous weight of any future decision. Every step had to be taken with responsibility, prudence, and humility. As the meetings progressed, a question began to emerge among some of his advisors, a question that no one could answer with certainty. What would happen if the existence of the letter became public? The possibilities were countless. Some believers would receive it with enthusiasm, others with skepticism, others with worry, and some might see it as the beginning of an unnecessary controversy. Leo XIV was aware of this, which was why he maintained the utmost discretion possible. But the rumors continued to grow, and with them grew the pressure, because as time passed, more people wanted to know what was truly happening. In the midst of all this, an official request arrived. A brief, respectful, yet significant request. It came from Cardinal Raymond Burke. He wished to meet with the Holy Father in private as soon as possible. When Leo XIV read the request, he remained thoughtful. He was not surprised. In a way, he had expected it to arrive. The letter had mentioned future opposition, and although he still did not know exactly how events would unfold, he understood that this encounter could become a decisive moment. Finally, he authorized the meeting. It would take place within a few days behind closed doors, without announcements, without journalists, and without observers, just two men, two visions, and a conversation that could influence the future of the church. When the news reached Burke, the cardinal simply nodded. The meeting was confirmed, and for the first time since he had heard of the mysterious letter, he felt he was approaching the center of history. Soon he would have the opportunity to hear directly from the Pope and discover whether the rumors were true, or if behind it all lay something much deeper, something capable of changing everything. The days leading up to the meeting passed with growing tension inside the Vatican. Few knew the details, but many knew that something important was occurring. Pope Leo XIV continued studying the letter. Meanwhile, Cardinal Raymond Burke prepared for the encounter. Both men understood the gravity of the moment. It was not an ordinary discussion or an administrative disagreement. What was at stake was much deeper. The meeting was scheduled for a quiet afternoon, far from the media, far from the cameras, and far from any public attention. When Burke arrived at the papal apartments, he was received with the usual courtesy. However, even he could perceive that the atmosphere was different, more serious, more solemn, and more charged with meaning. Finally, he was led into the Pope's private study, the very room where days earlier Monsignor Trevi had delivered the letter. Leo XIV stood up to greet him. Both greeted each other respectfully. For years, they had shared the same love for the Church, the same faith, and the same vocation. But they also knew they could hold different perspectives on certain topics. After a few minutes of initial conversation, the Pope went straight to the matter. He placed the envelope before the cardinal. Burke observed the document. His eyes fixed immediately on the handwriting. He recognized the name, recognized the importance, and understood that the rumors had not been exaggerated. That letter truly existed. The Pope spoke calmly. "Before saying anything, I want you to read it." Burke nodded, carefully took the sheets, and began to read. The room fell silent. For several minutes, not a single word was heard, only the sound of pages turning slowly as the cardinal advanced line after line. He read about the Augustinian Pope born in America. He read about the two lungs of the Church. He read about the opportunity for reconciliation. And finally, he reached the fragment mentioning the cardinal whose name meant strength. His expression remained controlled, but the change was evident. He reread that paragraph a second time, and then a third. When he finished, he slowly raised his eyes. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Burke broke the silence. "Your Holiness." Leo XIV nodded. "I know." The cardinal remained thoughtful, then added, "But it is also dangerous." That response did not surprise the Pope. It was exactly the type of reaction he expected. Burke continued, "We cannot allow a private revelation to determine doctrinal matters. The Church has always been prudent with these things." Leo XIV listened attentively. He did not argue, did not interrupt. He simply listened. Burke kept speaking. "Even if the letter is authentic, even if Sister Lucia truly wrote it, we must act with extreme caution. History teaches us that hasty interpretations can cause immense damage." The Pope nodded slowly. "I agree." That answer slightly surprised the cardinal, as he expected more resistance. But Leo XIV continued, "Precisely for that reason, I have dedicated these days to studying every aspect of the situation." The conversation extended for hours. They spoke of history, theology, unity, responsibility, and above all, they spoke of the future. Both agreed on something fundamental. Christian unity was a valuable objective, a goal worthy of being pursued, but they differed on how it should be achieved, and that difference was becoming increasingly evident. When the meeting came to an end, neither man had changed his position. However, both understood the other's perspective much better. As they said goodbye, Burke made an observation that remained echoing in the Pope's mind. "Holy Father." Leo XIV looked at him. "Yes, Eminence." Burke responded with serenity. "Whichever path you choose, there will be consequences." The Pope remained in silence, because he knew it was true. The letter had said it, history had proven it, and perhaps the future was about to confirm it. As the cardinal left the papal apartments, a strange feeling lingered in both men. The sense that this conversation had settled nothing. In reality, it had just opened a much larger door, a door that would lead to events that neither of them could fully foresee. And at the center of it all remained the very same question, the question that still had no answer. What did the final opportunity for unity truly mean? After the meeting with Cardinal Burke, Pope Leo XIV remained alone for a long time. Night had fallen over Rome. The lights of the Vatican shone in silence. On his desk, Sister Lucia's letter still rested, opened, studied, and analyzed time and again, yet still full of questions. The conversation with Burke had been respectful, even cordial. However, it had confirmed something important. The differences were real, and probably deeper than many imagined. It was not a personal dispute or a power struggle. It was a difference in vision, two distinct ways of understanding how the Church should face the challenges of the future. Meanwhile, outside the Vatican walls, rumors continued to grow. Some religious outlets were already openly speaking of a possible extraordinary meeting related to Christian unity. Others speculated about internal tensions. No one knew the whole story, but the tension mounted day by day. The Pope knew he could not keep the matter secret forever. Sooner or later, he would have to make a decision, and sooner or later, he would have to explain it. That night, Pope Leo XIV returned to the letter once more, his eyes tracing the faded lines under the soft glow of a single lamp. It was then that he noticed another passage that had slipped by during his earlier readings, a brief yet deeply unsettling paragraph that read, "When the appointed time comes, the guardians of tradition and the builders of bridges will confront each other." He lingered on those words, turning them over in his mind with quiet unease. Guardians of tradition, builders of bridges. The phrase captured the heart of the tension unfolding around him. On one side stood those who feared the loss of cherished elements of the faith they had guarded for generations. On the other, those convinced that true fidelity required reaching out in reconciliation. Both sides, he realized with a heavy heart, were driven by genuine love for the Church, each believing they were protecting its soul. That was what made the situation so profoundly difficult. There were no clear villains or enemies, only sincere people, each convinced they stood on the side of truth. The realization brought a quiet ache to his chest. The Pope slowly closed the letter, set it aside with care, and walked to his small private chapel. There, he knelt before the crucifix, head bowed, seeking not quick solutions, but the deeper gifts of clarity, peace, and wisdom. He understood that the coming months could mark one of the most defining chapters of his pontificate, a time that would test both his leadership and his trust in divine providence. As he prayed in the stillness, a new idea began to form in his heart. Perhaps the moment had come to open a broader dialogue, not only within the Vatican walls, but across the wider Church, involving bishops, theologians, scholars, and possibly even Orthodox representatives. The path carried real risks, yet it also felt increasingly necessary if genuine healing was to be pursued. The following morning, he convened a meeting with several trusted collaborators. For hours, they carefully weighed different scenarios, options, potential consequences, and possibilities. Eventually, a proposal took shape, one that would soon begin to shift the entire situation: the organization of a significant ecclesial consultation, a dedicated gathering focused on the challenges and hopes of Christian unity. The idea found immediate support from some advisors, while others voiced thoughtful reservations. Yet all agreed on one essential point: it was vital to create a space for honest dialogue, because ignoring the matter would not make it disappear. On the contrary, silence would only allow speculation and fear to spread. As those conversations continued, Cardinal Burke was wrestling with his own decisions. He had reflected deeply on what he had learned of the letter. Though his concerns remained strong, he recognized that the debate could no longer be postponed. Something significant was stirring, and the future of the Church might well depend on how it was faced. Neither man could yet imagine that the situation was about to take on an entirely new dimension. Very soon an unexpected response would arrive from the East, one that would alter the course of events and make the mysterious prophecy feel even more urgent and unsettling than before. Days after the meeting between Pope Leo XIV and Cardinal Burke, something few had anticipated began to unfold. A response, still unofficial but unmistakable, came from the East. Various representatives involved in Catholic-Orthodox dialogue started showing genuine interest in the circulating rumors about the letter. The news had crossed borders and oceans, drawing the attention of those who had long labored for reconciliation between the two churches. Leo XIV received several reports on these developments. Some Orthodox leaders inquired discreetly about the events in Rome. Others watched quietly, studying and weighing the implications. The Pope felt the growing weight of responsibility. This matter no longer belonged solely to the Vatican. It was now being observed by the broader Christian world, raising the stakes of every word and every decision. Meanwhile, Cardinal Burke continued to receive messages from concerned bishops, priests, and faithful. Many sought his thoughts, others asked for guidance, and some simply longed for reassurance amid the rising tide of rumors. Some claimed the letter foretold historic changes, others spoke of an approaching confrontation. Still others whispered of a brewing crisis within the Church. None of it was confirmed, yet the uncertainty only fueled deeper anxiety and a multitude of interpretations. In the midst of that situation, Leo XIV made an important decision. He needed to hear more voices. He needed to broaden the conversation. He needed to create a space where distinct perspectives could be heard, not to impose conclusions, but to seek discernment. For that reason, he began studying the possibility of convening an extraordinary meeting, a gathering that would allow for reflection on Christian unity and the challenges of the present. The proposal slowly began to take shape, and the further it progressed, the clearer it became that it could turn into one of the most important events of his pontificate. However, as preparations advanced discreetly, something unexpected happened. A message arrived from Constantinople, brief, respectful, yet deeply significant. The content was simple. The ecumenical patriarchate was closely following the events unfolding in Rome, and was willing to listen to any serious initiative related to dialogue and reconciliation. When Leo XIV read those words, he remained in silence. It was not a promise nor a commitment, but it was not a rejection either. It was a door left ajar, perhaps small, perhaps fragile, but real, and that was enough to capture his full attention, because, for decades, many attempts at rapprochement had stalled before even beginning. That response resolved nothing, but it demonstrated something important. Interest in dialogue still existed. Hope still remained. Meanwhile, in another part of Rome, Cardinal Burke analyzed the same situation from a different perspective. He also understood the importance of that opening. But he remained worried, because for him, unity could never be built upon ambiguity. Doctrinal clarity remained essential, and he was convinced that any future process had to fully respect that reality. Thus, as both men observed the same events, they arrived at distinct conclusions, not completely opposite, but different. And that difference was becoming the true center of the story, not a struggle between individuals, but a tension between visions, priorities, and possible paths. Sister Lucia's letter seemed to have anticipated precisely that, for the further events progressed. The more evident it became that the announced conflict did not revolve around power or influence. It revolved around a much deeper question. How do you heal a 1,000-year-old wound without creating new wounds in the process? And that question still had no answer. The response from Constantinople changed the atmosphere within the Vatican. not because it resolved existing problems or guaranteed future reconciliation, but because it showed that, for the first time in a long time, a real possibility for dialogue existed. A small possibility, but enough to capture everyone's attention. Pope Leo XIV spent the following days reflecting deeply on that opportunity. He knew that history was filled with failed attempts. He knew that for centuries there had been encounters, conversations, and declarations that ended without definitive results. However, he also knew that no reconciliation was possible if no one was willing to take the first step. Meanwhile, rumors continued to spread. What had started as a limited conversation within certain ecclesial circles was becoming a topic of international interest. Religious journalists attempted to obtain information, analysts discussed possible scenarios, and the faithful observed with growing expectation. In the midst of all this, Cardinal Burke decided to express himself more clearly in private conversations. He was not attacking the Pope, nor was he questioning his authority, but he did voice a constant concern. Unity was important, fundamental even. However, in his view, unity had to be built upon truth, and any step that could generate doctrinal confusion deserved to be examined with extreme care. Many shared that concern, while others thought differently, considering that it was precisely the lack of dialogue that had allowed the wound to remain open for centuries. Thus, positions began to be defined little by little, not as two enemy camps, but as two distinct ways of confronting the same challenge. Leo XIV observed it all attentively, and the more he listened, the more convinced he became of one reality. The letter was not causing the conflict. It was simply revealing tensions that had already existed for a long time, tensions that had remained hidden beneath the surface, but were now beginning to come to light. One afternoon, while reviewing Sister Lucia's document once more, he found a phrase that caught his attention powerfully once again. He had read it before, but at that moment it seemed to acquire a different meaning. It read, "The test will not be to recognize the wound. The test will be having the courage to heal it." The Pope remained observing those words for a long time, because healing a wound was much harder than simply acknowledging its existence. Identifying the problem was easy, finding a solution was another story. And precisely there lay the true challenge. The days kept passing, consultations continued, reports kept arriving from different parts of the world, and every new message confirmed the same thing. Tension was growing, expectation was rising, and pressure on the Vatican was becoming increasingly intense. Finally, Leo XIV made an important decision. The time had come to act, not hastily or impulsively, but with clarity. He began preparing an initiative that would gather various Catholic, Orthodox, academic, and pastoral voices for a broad, serene, and deep conversation. When some of his collaborators learned of the plan, they immediately understood the magnitude of what was being prepared. It was no longer simply a private reflection. It was becoming a process that could influence the future of relations between East and West. And precisely for that reason, reactions began to multiply. Some expressed enthusiasm, others worry, and others prudence. But no one remained indifferent, because everyone sensed that something important was beginning. And as the Vatican moved slowly toward this new stage, the prophecy continued to unfold in an unsettling manner. Every event seemed to fit with an accuracy that was increasingly difficult to ignore, as if a story written decades ago were unfolding before the eyes of the world. And the most surprising part was that the most decisive portion had not yet arrived, for a public statement was drawing closer and closer, and when it finally occurred, nothing would ever be the same again. The decision was made. After weeks of prayer, consultation, and reflection, Pope Leo XIV understood that he could no longer limit himself to studying the letter in private. The time had come to step forward, not because he had all the answers, but because some questions were too important to remain locked within the walls of an office. During a confidential meeting with several close collaborators, he officially presented his proposal: a great ecclesial gathering, a broad convocation, a space for dialogue intended to reflect on Christian unity and the challenges that continued to separate East and West. The news was quick to generate reactions, even before becoming public. Some advisors considered it a courageous decision, others described it as risky, and a few characterized it as potentially explosive. All had one thing in common: they knew it would carry consequences. For Christian unity was not merely a historical matter. It was a deeply emotional, theological, and spiritual issue, and any serious attempt to move forward would inevitably awaken intense opinions. Leo XIV listened to every observation, every warning, and every recommendation, but he did not alter his decision. He felt he had to continue, not because he believed he possessed the perfect solution, but because he was convinced that silence was no longer enough. Meanwhile, Cardinal Burke received information about the plans taking shape. The news confirmed some of his concerns. He did not reject dialogue. He had never rejected it. But he remained convinced that certain principles could not be obscured in the name of reconciliation. That was why he began to prepare himself not for a personal confrontation, but for a debate he sensed was inevitable. A debate that would soon involve theologians, bishops, and religious leaders from different parts of the world. In the following days, expectations continued to grow. Every new rumor fueled interest. Every comment generated new questions. And the more public attention increased, the harder it became to control the narrative. The Vatican maintained its silence, but that silence was beginning to speak for itself. Many interpreted the absence of statements as a sign that something truly important was occurring. And perhaps they were right, because inside the papal study, Sister Lucia's letter continued to occupy a central place. Leo XIV had read it so many times that he knew several fragments by heart. However, there was one phrase that kept returning to his mind again and again, a phrase that seemed to haunt him, accompanying him in every decision. It read, "The opportunity will arrive when least expected, and it will disappear if fear rules hearts." Those words were difficult to ignore because they described the exact type of moment he was living through. An opportunity, but also a risk. An open door, but also the possibility of seeing it close. For the Pope, that was the true issue. It was not merely about resolving historical problems, it was about deciding what to do when an unexpected opportunity appeared before you, especially when that opportunity came accompanied by uncertainty, criticism, and potential consequences. Weeks continued to advance. Preparations moved forward, and signs of interest arrived from different places around the world. Some Orthodox leaders observed attentively, various theologians began to exchange opinions, and within the Catholic Church, debate grew over what might happen in the coming months. However, no one imagined what was about to take place, because while all attention was focused on Rome, a new event was beginning to unfold. An unexpected event that would once again place the mysterious prophecy at the center of the conversation and cause even the most skeptical to wonder if it could all be a simple coincidence. While preparations continued in Rome, something unexpected happened. Something no one had foreseen that placed Sister Lucia's letter back at the center of every conversation. It all began with a leak. Not a full leak, nor a complete copy of the document, but enough fragments to spark immense attention. Certain phrases began circulating discreetly among journalists specializing in religious affairs, then appeared on forums, then on analysis programs, and finally reached international media outlets. The question was no longer whether a letter existed. The question was what it contained exactly. Every day, new theories, new interpretations, and new speculations emerged. Some asserted that the letter announced a great reconciliation, others claimed it predicted a profound division, and many simply tried to separate fact from rumor within the Vatican. Concern mounted, not because the entire content had been revealed, but because the information was reaching the public in piecemeal fashion, and fragments taken out of context could be dangerous. Pope Leo XIV immediately understood the problem. Uncertainty fueled confusion, and confusion could generate fear, precisely what the letter seemed to warn against. For that reason, he began considering the possibility of a public explanation at the right time, not to reveal every detail, but to prevent speculation from taking control of the situation. Meanwhile, Cardinal Burke observed the unfolding events attentively. He also saw the danger, because when information circulates incompletely, people tend to fill in the gaps with their own interpretations, and those interpretations rarely agree with one another. Reactions were not long in coming. Some groups began showing enthusiasm, believing the Church was entering a new historical stage. Others reacted with caution, preferring to wait, listen, and analyze. And some expressed deep concern, fearing that any hasty move could create new divisions. Thus, tension continued to build, not like a sudden explosion, but as a constant, slow, silent, yet increasingly evident pressure. One night, while reviewing the letter once more, Leo XIV found another passage that seemed especially relevant to what was occurring. Many will speak before understanding. Many will judge before listening, and many will be afraid before knowing. The Pope spent a long time observing those words, because they described exactly what he was witnessing. The letter seemed to anticipate not only the events, but also the human reactions that would accompany them. The fear, the uncertainty, the impatience, and the need for immediate answers. It was all there. And as the days went by, it became harder to ignore. Meanwhile, messages kept arriving from different parts of the world: bishops, priests, theologians, and Orthodox representatives, all observing, all waiting, all trying to understand what was truly happening. In the midst of that growing expectation, fresh news reached the Vatican, news that surprised even those who had been closely following the matter for weeks. For the first time, a prominent Orthodox figure publicly expressed genuine interest in participating in future conversations promoted by Rome. The reaction within the papal circles was immediate and deeply felt. Some interpreted it as a hopeful sign of openness, while others viewed it as little more than a cautious diplomatic gesture. For Leo XIV himself, however, it carried a quiet but profound significance. It suggested that the door to reconciliation, however narrow, remained ajar. As long as that possibility existed, he felt a cautious sense of hope stirring within him, tempered always by the weight of responsibility he carried. Yet the prophecy had also spoken clearly of something still to come: opposition, resistance, and the foretold conflict. Though many did not yet realize it, that moment was drawing nearer. Soon, a statement would emerge that would dramatically shift the tone of the entire conversation, one that would draw the eyes of millions toward Rome, and place both Pope Leo XIV and Cardinal Burke at the heart of a discussion watched intently by the wider Christian world. Attention surrounding the mysterious letter continued to intensify. What had begun as a confidential matter known to only a handful within the Vatican was now quietly becoming a topic of conversation in parishes, theological circles, and Christian communities across continents. Questions multiplied, speculations grew bolder, and each new rumor seemed to deepen the atmosphere of uncertainty and quiet tension. Throughout it all, Pope Leo XIV maintained a measured and prudent demeanor. He had no desire to rush events or provoke unnecessary controversy, yet he also refused to turn away from what he sensed might be a significant opportunity. With steady resolve, he continued preparing for the larger gathering that was slowly taking shape. A meeting meant not to dictate outcomes, but to listen, to dialogue, to reflect honestly, and to seek paths toward greater understanding. Still, not everyone viewed the developments with the same cautious optimism. Among influential figures within the Church, genuine worry persisted. Men and women convinced that even a small misstep could lead to far-reaching and unpredictable consequences for the faithful they served. It was within this charged atmosphere that the long-awaited statement finally came. A brief but firm message from Cardinal Raymond Burke. Though his words were measured and respectful, they carried undeniable weight. He reaffirmed the vital importance of safeguarding doctrinal clarity, acknowledged Christian unity as a noble and prayerful goal, yet gently warned that the pursuit of reconciliation must never come at the cost of confusion regarding the fundamental truths of the faith. The statement was received in many different ways. Some saw it as a timely call to prudence, others as a necessary warning, and still others as the first public sign of the very opposition the prophecy had foretold. Inside the Vatican, the reactions were swift, not because the words were harsh, for they were not, but because they confirmed a growing reality. Differences in vision and approach were now moving into the open. The debate had entered a new, more public phase, one that would test the patience, charity, and conviction of everyone involved. In the quiet corridors, one could sense both apprehension and a reluctant recognition that the path ahead would demand great wisdom and even greater humility from all sides. Pope Leo XIV read the statement carefully, then read it a second time and a third. He found no hostility, but he did find concern, a sincere concern. Precisely for that reason, he chose not to respond immediately. He preferred to listen, understand, and prevent differences from turning into unnecessary confrontations. Meanwhile, Sister Lucia's letter continued to cast its shadow over every event, for the further the situation progressed, the more people recalled that unsettling phrase, "A cardinal whose name means strength will rise to oppose." Many began discussing it. Some considered it a coincidence, others did not, but all recognized that the similarity was striking. Leo XIV tried not to obsess over that part of the prophecy. He knew he had to focus on real decisions, real people, and real problems. Yet it was impossible to ignore how certain events seemed to be unfolding exactly as they had been described decades ago. Weeks kept passing. Preparations continued, conversations multiplied, and expectation grew. It was then that something unexpected happened, something that completely altered the landscape, as for the first time, several Christian leaders from distinct traditions publicly expressed interest in participating in the future gathering convened by Rome. The news generated surprise and hope. To some, it was a positive sign. To others, a historic opportunity. But to Leo XIV, it represented something deeper. It represented the possibility that the door mentioned in the letter was beginning to open. Even so, a problem remained. An open door did not guarantee that people would be willing to cross it. Precisely there lay the true challenge, because every step forward seemed accompanied by new doubts, new questions, and new resistance. History was accelerating, and everyone could feel it, but no one yet knew where that path was truly leading. And according to Sister Lucia's mysterious letter, the hardest part was yet to come. As the date of the great gathering convened by Pope Leo XIV approached, tension kept rising. It was no longer merely a matter of rumors or a letter found in the archives. Now, there were real expectations. Bishops, theologians, journalists, and faithful from all over the world closely followed every move of the Vatican. What was taking place was acquiring a historic dimension. The Pope was fully aware of this, which was why he continued to act with caution. Every statement was carefully reviewed, every meeting planned in detail, and every step taken after much reflection. Meanwhile, Cardinal Burke also observed the growing international interest. He knew that millions of people were paying attention to events, and he understood that any word could have enormous consequences. Therefore, he continued to insist on the need for prudence, both in private and in public. He was not seeking confrontation, at least not openly, but he did not conceal his concerns either, remaining convinced that certain matters demanded maximum clarity and standing ready to defend that position. In the meantime, official responses began arriving from different parts of the world. Some religious leaders expressed enthusiasm for the Pope's initiative, others voiced reservations, and some adopted a wait-and-see stance, observing, analyzing, and listening without committing yet. For Leo XIV, that was understandable. After all, the wounds of a millennium do not disappear overnight. The mistrust accumulated over centuries does not easily vanish either. Precisely for that reason, the situation demanded patience, a patience not everyone was willing to exercise. Pressures mounted, questions increased, and the media kept demanding answers. One afternoon, while studying Sister Lucia's letter once more, the Pope found a fragment that seemed written for that exact moment. A fragment that until then had not drawn much of his attention. It read, "When the door opens, many will run, others will shrink back, and some will try to close it out of fear." Leo XIV read those lines several times because they described perfectly what he was witnessing. There were people full of enthusiasm, people full of caution, and people full of fear. 3 distinct reactions, 3 completely normal human responses, yet all present at the same time. The Pope rested the letter on the table and, for the first time, began to wonder if the true difficulty was not unity among churches. Perhaps the true difficulty was the human condition. Fear, mistrust, resistance to change. Elements that had accompanied humanity forever and now seemed to manifest once again. Meanwhile, across different parts of the Christian world, expectations kept rising. Some media outlets were already talking about a possible historic event. Others warned of risks of new divisions. And some simply recognized that something important was occurring, because even those who doubted the letter admitted an evident reality. The conversation about Christian unity had returned to center stage, and that alone was extraordinary. However, what no one imagined was that a new event was about to completely alter the situation, an unexpected event that would directly involve Cardinal Burke himself and make the ancient prophecy seem even more unsettling. For the first time since the letter was discovered, the words written 81 years earlier would begin to coincide with events in a way that would prove difficult to ignore. The atmosphere inside the Vatican had become increasingly intense. Every day brought new comments, new analyses, and new interpretations. Sister Lucia's letter remained a mystery to most, but its influence was already impossible to deny. Meanwhile, Pope Leo XIV continued preparing the great gathering that had begun to take shape. Invitations were proceeding, consultations kept developing, and international interest grew week after week. However, it was then that something unexpected happened, something no one had foreseen that once again placed Cardinal Raymond Burke at the center of the story. It all began during a private conference in which Burke answered questions about the current situation of the Church. Most topics were standard: doctrine, evangelization, contemporary challenges. But inevitably, the question everyone was waiting for appeared. The letter, the prophecy, and the rumors regarding the future meeting promoted by the Pope. For a few seconds, Burke remained silent. Then he responded with serenity, but his words had a massive impact. Unity is a precious good. We must always seek it, but true unity can never be built upon confusion. The phrase was immediately reproduced by numerous media outlets. Some interpreted it as a critique, others as a warning, and others simply as a prudent reflection. But the result was the same. The conversation intensified. Thousands of people began debating the meaning of those words. And once again, attention returned to the mysterious letter. When Leo XIV read the statements, he showed no surprise. He knew the cardinal well. He knew he spoke from his convictions, and he also knew that many shared those concerns. Therefore, he decided to stay calm. He would not respond publicly, nor feed a confrontation, at least not as long as the possibility of sincere dialogue existed. However, that very night, something occurred that caught his deep attention. He reread the letter and found a fragment that seemed to describe exactly what was happening. The words read, "The guardian will speak because he believes he is protecting the treasure, and many will follow him because they fear losing what they love." The Pope remained motionless. That phrase was unsettling, not because it pointed to enemies, but because it seemed to understand the motivations of everyone involved. The letter did not speak of malice, ambition, or betrayal. It spoke of people attempting to protect what they considered valuable. And that made everything much more complex. For when two groups deeply love the same thing, disagreements often become harder to resolve. Meanwhile, outside the Vatican, reactions kept multiplying. Some faithful were beginning to see the situation as a historic moment. Others observed it with concern, and many simply tried to understand what was truly taking place. Experts debated, media analyzed, and speculation kept growing. But there was something few were noticing, something that was beginning to seriously worry Leo XIV. Public attention was focusing more and more on the conflict, and less on the possibility of reconciliation. It was as if people were more interested in confrontation than in solutions, more interested in differences than in points of common ground. And precisely that seemed to contradict the spirit of the message he had read. For if the letter repeated anything constantly, it was the need to heal, not to divide, not to conquer, not to defeat, but to heal. Yet achieving it was proving much harder than he had imagined, and most concerning of all was that the most important event was still to come. The official announcement, the public convocation, the moment when the entire church would learn of the Pope's plans. And when that day arrived, the reaction of the Christian world could change everything. Expectation reached a new level when reports began circulating that the Vatican was preparing an important announcement. There was no official confirmation yet, but enough people had heard the same thing for rumors to multiply rapidly. Pope Leo XIV knew that moment was drawing near. For weeks, he had listened to opinions, consulted experts, and studied the letter time and again. Now he began to realize that silence could no longer be prolonged indefinitely. Sooner or later, he would have to speak, not necessarily about all the details of the prophecy, but about the path he wished to follow. Meanwhile, Cardinal Burke continued observing every event carefully. His concern remained the same: clarity, fidelity, and prudence. Although he deeply respected the Holy Father, he was convinced that certain decisions required rigorous examination. Therefore, he continued dialoguing with bishops, theologians, and priests, listening to different perspectives, evaluating potential consequences, and preparing for whatever might come. In the midst of all this, the Pope once again took refuge in prayer. One night, he remained alone in the small private chapel. The dim light illuminated the crucifix before him, and for a moment all the noise outside seemed to vanish. The rumors, the discussions, the speculations. Only silence and reflection remained. It was then that he remembered once more one of the most unsettling phrases from the letter. The hardest test will not be opposition. The hardest test will be fear. Those words resonated deeply within him, for he understood something important. Often, decisions do not fail because of enemies. They fail because of fear of being wrong, fear of criticism, fear of consequences, fear of change. And perhaps that was precisely the challenge facing not only him, but the entire church. The next day, new responses began arriving from different parts of the world. Some Christian leaders expressed hope, others caution, others uncertainty, but practically all agreed on one thing. The situation merited attention, for the issues emerging were too important to be ignored. Unity, reconciliation, historical memory, and the wounds of centuries, topics that had accompanied entire generations, were once again occupying the center of the conversation. Meanwhile, preparations kept moving forward. More and more people were beginning to suspect that the Vatican would announce something significant. The question was when, and above all, what exactly it would be. Journalists sought answers, commentators formulated theories, the faithful kept waiting, and pressure mounted day by day. It was then that something happened that surprised even some of the Pope's close collaborators. Leo XIV made a definitive decision. The date for the announcement would be set, the convocation would proceed, and the process of dialogue would officially begin. When the news reached those working alongside him, many immediately understood the magnitude of the moment. It was no longer a possibility or an idea under study. It was now a reality that would soon be known to the entire world. And as Rome prepared for that historic announcement, the ancient prophecy seemed to draw closer to its decisive point, because once the process officially began, there would be no turning back. And according to the words written decades ago by Sister Lucia, it was precisely then that the true test would begin. The decision was made. After weeks of reflection, consultation, and prayer, Pope Leo XIV officially authorized preparations for the Great Convocation. It would not be an ordinary encounter, nor a conference, nor a simple administrative meeting. The objective was much deeper: to open a space to reflect on Christian unity, listen to distinct perspectives, examine the wounds of the past, and seek paths forward into the future. The news was not yet public, but within the Vatican it was already becoming known, and reactions were immediate. Some received the decision with hope, others with prudence, and some with open concern. All understood that the initiative would carry significant repercussions, for the issues at stake had accompanied the history of the Church for nearly 1,000 years. Meanwhile, Cardinal Burke received information about the decision. He read it carefully and remained silent for several minutes. He was not surprised. Deep down, he had anticipated something similar. The direction events were taking seemed to lead inevitably toward a grand dialogue. The true question lay elsewhere. What would happen within that dialogue? What conclusions would emerge? What proposals would appear? And above all, how far would the Vatican be willing to go? Those questions remained unanswered. But Burke knew he would soon have the opportunity to raise them publicly. Meanwhile, Pope Leo XIV continued studying the letter. He knew it almost by heart, yet certain phrases kept drawing his attention as if he were reading them for the first time. That night, he paused once more at a specific fragment, one that seemed increasingly relevant. When the hour comes, hearts will be tested, not by what they reject, but by what they are willing to hear. Leo XIV remained observing those words for a long time, understanding the depth of that message. Listening did not mean agreeing. Listening did not mean abandoning one's convictions. But listening did require humility, and humility was never easy, especially when such monumental issues were involved. As night advanced over Rome, the Pope began to ponder the meaning of that test. Perhaps the true challenge was not convincing others. Perhaps it was creating the conditions for dialogue to be possible, for people to hear one another, and for ancient wounds to be understood, and perhaps one day healed. However, outside the Vatican walls, the climate continued to intensify. Media kept speculating, analysts kept debating, and the faithful kept waiting for answers. World attention was growing, and with it grew the pressure. It was then that a report arrived that caught the Holy Father's strong attention. Several Christian leaders had officially confirmed their interest in participating in future conversations. It was not an agreement nor an alliance, but it was a clear sign of willingness to dialogue, a sign that just months earlier would have seemed improbable. Leo XIV observed the report in silence. For the first time in days, he allowed a faint smile to appear, because regardless of what happened next, that proved a possibility still existed. A door remained open, and hope still endured. But the letter had also warned of something else, something that was drawing nearer: the opposition, the resistance, the crisis, elements that seemed inevitable. And the further events progressed, the clearer it became that this stage was about to begin. For the official announcement was prepared, the date had been set, and when the world heard the words of Pope Leo XIV, history would enter a completely new phase. The day finally arrived. The announcement that for weeks had been the subject of rumors, speculation, and debate was about to be made public. From early morning, activity within the Vatican was unusual. Officials, advisors, and media representatives all knew something important was going to happen, though few knew the exact details. Pope Leo XIV spent the first hours of the morning in prayer, as he had done so many times since the discovery of the letter. Pressure was enormous, as were expectations. But in that moment, he sought something more important than approval or criticism. He sought clarity, peace, and fidelity to his conscience. Meanwhile, in different parts of the world, thousands of people followed news coming out of Rome. Attention was extraordinary. Many sensed they were witnessing the beginning of a historic event. Others observed with caution, and some with open concern. The hour arrived. Finally, the Vatican issued the official announcement. Pope Leo XIV was convening a great assembly of reflection and dialogue focused on the future of relations among Christian churches and possible paths toward greater unity. The statement was prudent. It did not speak of doctrinal changes, did not announce definitive decisions, nor did it impose conclusions. Its purpose was to open a space for listening, study, and discernment. However, the impact was immediate. In a matter of hours, the news traveled the world. Religious media began analyzing every word. Commentators debated its potential implications. And the faithful sought to understand what that announcement truly meant. Las reacciones no tardaron en aparecer. Algunos celebraron la iniciativa. La consideraban una oportunidad histórica, un paso valiente, un signo de esperanza. Otros respondieron con cautela, recordando que los desafíos acumulados durante siglos no podían resolverse fácilmente. También hubo quienes expresaron inquietud, temiendo que el proceso pudiera generar nuevas tensiones. Música. El cardenal Burke observó atentamente todo lo que estaba ocurriendo. Leyó el comunicado completo, música varias veces, y aunque reconoció el tono moderado del texto, seguía manteniendo sus reservas. Sabía que muchas personas esperarían escuchar su opinión, pero decidió actuar con prudencia. Todavía no era el momento de responder, todavía no. Mientras tanto, el Papa León X regresó a su estudio privado. Sobre el escritorio, seguía descansando la carta de Sor Lucía. La tomó nuevamente entre sus manos y abrió una de las páginas finales. Allí encontró otra frase que parecía hablar directamente al momento que estaba viviendo. Cuando la puerta se abra, el mundo observará. Muchos buscarán respuestas inmediatas, pero la verdad más despacio que la multitud. León XIV permaneció contemplando aquellas palabras porque describían exactamente la situación. Todos querían respuestas. Todos querían conclusiones. Todos querían saber cómo terminaría la historia. Pero los procesos importantes rara vez avanzan al ritmo de la impaciencia humana. La reconciliación requería tiempo, la comprensión requería tiempo, y la confianza requería aún más tiempo. Esa misma noche comenzaron a llegar mensajes desde distintos países: obispos, música, priarcas, teólogos, representantes de diversas tradiciones cristianas. Algunos expresaban apoyo, otros simplemente manifestaban interés, pero todos reconocían que algo significativo estaba ocurriendo. Por primera vez en mucho tiempo, la conversación sobre la unidad cristiana ocupaba el centro de la atención mundial, y eso era imposible de ignorar. Sin embargo, mientras las reacciones seguían multiplicándose, una nueva pregunta comenzaba: música a surgir. Una pregunta que pronto dominaría todos los debates, porque ahora que la convocatoria era oficial, todos querían saber lo mismo. ¿Qué posición adoptaría finalmente el cardenal Raymond Burke? Y según la antigua profecía, la respuesta a esa pregunta podía cambiarlo todo. La pregunta comenzó a repetirse en todas partes, en los pasillos del Vaticano, en programas de análisis religioso, en universidades católicas, en comunidades parroquiales, y también en los círculos ortodoxos que observaban atentamente lo que estaba ocurriendo. ¿Qué haría el cardenal Raymond Burke? Porque hasta ese momento había expresado sus preocupaciones, había insistido en la necesidad de prudencia, había defendido la importancia de la claridad doctrinal, pero todavía no había respondido directamente a la convocatoria del Papa, y el silencio comenzaba a generar aún más especulación. Mientras tanto, León XIV seguía adelante con los preparativos. Sabía que las próximas semanas serían decisivas, no solo para el encuentro que estaba organizando, sino también para el clima general dentro de la Iglesia. Música. Cada palabra pronunciada, cada declaración publicada, cada reacción pública podía influir en el futuro del proceso. Por eso seguía actuando con calma. Música, evitando polémicas innecesarias y manteniendo el enfoque en el diálogo por o fuera del Vaticano. El debate seguía creciendo. Algunos, música comentaristas, afirmaban que el encuentro podía convertirse en un momento histórico comparable a otros grandes acontecimientos eclesiales. Otros advertían que las expectativas eran demasiado altas y que la decepción podía ser enorme si los resultados no cumplían con lo que muchos imaginaban. En medio de aquellas discusiones, apareció finalmente la respuesta que todos estaban esperando, una carta pública firmada por el cardenal Burke. El documento era respetuoso, cuidadosamente redactado y profundamente reflexivo, pero música también era firme. Burke comenzaba reafirmando su amor por la Iglesia, su respeto por el ministerio petrino. Vi su deseo sincero de ver fortalecida la unidad entre los cristianos. Sin embargo, añadía una advertencia. La unidad auténtica, escribió, no podía construirse sacrificando la claridad de la fe. No podía apoyarse en ambigüedades. Y no podía surgir de interpretaciones apresuradas motivadas por la presión del momento. La carta fue publicada y difundida rápidamente. Las reacciones llegaron casi de inmediato. Algunos la celebraron, otros la criticaron, pero prácticamente todos coincidieron en algo. La posición de Burke había quedado clara. No, música, estaba rechazando el diálogo, pero tampoco estaba dispuesto a aceptar cualquier camino hacia la reconciliación. Aquella declaración tuvo un enorme impacto, porque confirmó que las diferencias seguían presentes y que el debate que se aproximaba sería mucho más profundo de lo que muchos habían imaginado. Cuando León XIV leyó la carta, permaneció pensativo. No encontró hostilidad. No encontró ataques personales. Encontró convicción. Y precisamente por eso comprendió la importancia del momento. Las personas involucradas en esta historia, música, no eran adversarios, eran hombres que amaban profundamente a la Iglesia, que precisamente por ese amor veían ciertos temas de manera diferente. La situación era más compleja de lo que los titulares podían mostrar, mucho más compleja. Esa noche, el Papa volvió a leer las últimas líneas de la carta de Sor Lucía, y una frase volvió a llamar su atención, una frase música, que parecía adquirir un significado cada vez más profundo. Los corazones sinceros no siempre caminarán por el mismo sendero, pero la verdad revelará sus frutos con el tiempo. León XIV cerró lentamente el documento. Aquellas palabras le recordaban algo importante. No todas las diferencias significaban enemistad, no toda oposición significaba mala intención y no toda crisis, música, terminaba en división. A veces las crisis también podían convertirse en oportunidades para escuchar, para aprender y para crecer. Sin embargo, la verdadera prueba todavía no había llegado, porque el encuentro convocado por Roma estaba cada vez más cerca, y cuando finalmente comenzaran las conversaciones, dejarían de ser teóricas. Las preguntas, música, tendrían que enfrentarse directamente, y las decisiones futuras empezarían a tomar forma. Era entonces cuando se descubriría si la puerta abierta por la profecía conduciría hacia la reconciliación o hacia una nueva herida. La cuenta regresiva había comenzado. Cada día que pasaba acercaba más a la Iglesia, al encuentro convocado por el Papa León X, lo que en un principio parecía una simple iniciativa de diálogo. Se estaba transformando en algo mucho más grande, algo que atraía la atención de creyentes, teólogos, periodistas y líderes religiosos de todo el mundo. Roma se preparaba para recibir visitantes de numerosos países. Las conversaciones preliminares ya estaban en marcha. Los equipos de trabajo organizaban reuniones, los expertos intercambiaban documentos y las expectativas seguían creciendo. Mientras tanto, el Papa León XIV observaba todo aquello con una mezcla de esperanza y preocupación. Esperanza porque veía señales de apertura. Preocupación porque también veía señales de tensión. Sabía que ambas realidades coexistían y sabía que ignorar cualquiera de ellas sería un error. El cardenal Burke también seguía preparándose. Había decidido participar activamente en las conversaciones, no para bloquearlas, no para sabotearlas, sino para asegurarse de que las cuestiones que consideraba esenciales fueran escuchadas. Música. Muchos interpretaron su decisión como una señal positiva. Otros continuaron viendo un posible conflicto en el horizonte. Pero una cosa era evidente: Burke no tenía intención de permanecer al margen. y eso garantizaba que el debate sería profundo. Mientras los preparativos avanzaban, música comenzaron a surgir nuevas discusiones dentro de distintos círculos eclesiales. Algunos preguntaban qué significaba realmente la unidad. Otros debatían cómo debía construirse música. Y muchos coincidían en que la reconciliación verdadera requería algo más que acuerdos formales. Quería confianza, y la confianza era precisamente lo que más había sufrido durante siglos. El Papa comprendía perfectamente esa realidad. Por eso insistía constantemente en la necesidad de escuchar. No solo hablar, no solo enseñar, no solo convencer, escuchar. Porque estaba convencido de que muchas heridas permanecían abiertas precisamente porque las partes habían dejado de escucharse mutuamente. Una tarde recibió un nuevo informe relacionado con la participación internacional. El documento era extenso y contenía música, noticias que consideró alentadoras. Varias figuras importantes del mundo cristiano habían confirmado oficialmente su interés en seguir de cerca el proceso. Algunas incluso habían aceptado participar en determinados encuentros preparatorios. León XIV observó aquellos nombres en silencio. Cada confirmación representaba una oportunidad. Una pequeña oportunidad, pero una oportunidad al fin. Sin embargo, también sabía que las oportunidades podían perderse. La historia estaba llena de ocasiones desperdiciadas, momentos en los que el miedo había prevalecido sobre la esperanza, momentos en los que la desconfianza había sido más fuerte que el diálogo. Música. Precisamente por eso volvió a abrir la carta de Sor Lucía, y una vez más encontró palabras, música, que parecían hablar directamente a la situación que estaba viviendo. La puerta permanecerá abierta solo por un tiempo. Muchos dudarán, muchos esperarán demasiado y algunos comprenderán demasiado tarde. El Papa permaneció inmóvil durante varios segundos. Aquellas frases tenían una fuerza especial porque le recordaban que las oportunidades no duran para siempre, que las decisiones importantes no pueden aplazarse indefinidamente y que a veces la historia exige actuar antes de que sea demasiado tarde. Mientras tanto, fuera del Vaticano, la atención pública seguía creciendo. Cada nueva noticia generaba más preguntas. Cada nueva declaración provocaba más análisis, y la expectativa alcanzaba niveles que pocos habían imaginado meses atrás. Pero entre toda aquella atención había una cuestión que comenzaba a preocupar, especialmente a varios observadores. No era la unidad, no era la teología, ni siquiera la profecía, era algo más simple. ¿Qué ocurriría si las conversaciones fracasaban? ¿Qué ocurriría si después de toda la esperanza generada, las diferencias resultaban demasiado profundas? Era una pregunta cómoda, una pregunta que nadie quería responder, pero que comenzaba a aparecer cada vez con más frecuencia. Y según las últimas líneas de la misteriosa carta, la respuesta a esa pregunta podía determinar el futuro de toda la historia. La pregunta comenzó a extenderse silenciosamente, primero entre analistas, luego entre teólogos, después entre periodistas especializados y finalmente entre los propios participantes del proceso. ¿Qué ocurriría si todo fracasaba? Era una posibilidad, que nadie deseaba considerar, pero que ya no podía ignorarse, porque cuanto más se acercaba el encuentro convocado por el Papa León XIV, más evidente resultaba la magnitud del desafío. No se trataba simplemente de organizar reuniones, ni de intercambiar discursos, ni de firmar documentos. Se trataba de afrontar una herida que llevaba abierta casi 1000 años. Y las heridas tan antiguas rara vez desaparecen fácilmente. El Papa comprendía esa realidad mejor que nadie. Por eso seguía insistiendo en la paciencia, en la humildad y en la necesidad de escuchar antes de juzgar. Sin embargo, la presión continuaba creciendo. Las expectativas eran enormes y las expectativas excesivas pueden convertirse fácilmente en decepción. Mientras tanto, el cardenal Burke observaba el desarrollo de los acontecimientos con atención. Compartía algunas de esas preocupaciones. Sabía que el entusiasmo podía ser peligroso cuando se transformaba en impaciencia, porque las cuestiones profundas no se resuelven mediante emociones pasajeras. Requieren tiempo, estudio, discernimiento y fidelidad. Por eso seguía defendiendo música, la prudencia, incluso cuando otros pedían avances más rápidos. Una tarde, mientras revisaba nuevamente la carta de Sor Lucía, León XIV se llegó a uno de los últimos pasajes música del documento, un fragmento breve, pero profundamente inquietante. Las palabras decían: «La herida puede sanar, pero primero deberá ser reconocida por completo, y muchos descubrirán que es más profunda de lo que imaginaban». El Papa permaneció largo tiempo observando aquellas líneas, música, porque comprendía exactamente lo que significaban. Durante siglos, diferentes generaciones habían intentado resolver las divisiones, pero quizá nunca habían enfrentado plenamente todas sus causas, todas sus consecuencias, todo su dolor acumulado. Tal vez esa era precisamente la razón por la que la reconciliación seguía siendo tan difícil. No bastaba con hablar del futuro, también era necesario comprender el pasado, y comprender el pasado exigía valentía, más valentía de la que muchas personas estaban dispuestas a admitir. Mientras tanto, las noticias seguían llegando desde diferentes partes del mundo. Algunas alentadoras, otras preocupantes. Algunas reflejaban esperanza, otras mostraban escepticismo, pero todas confirmaban una misma realidad. El mundo cristiano estaba observando música, observando cada paso, cada palabra, cada decisión. La atención era inmensa y con ella aumentaba también la responsabilidad. Esa noche, León XV caminó solo por uno de los jardines interiores del Vaticano. El aire era tranquilo, las luces iluminaban suavemente los senderos, y por unos momentos pudo alejarse del ruido constante que rodeaba la situación. Mientras caminaba, recordó algo que había aprendido muchos años atrás. Las grandes transformaciones rara vez comienzan con respuestas. Casi siempre comienzan con preguntas difíciles, música incómodas, pero necesarias. Y quizá eso era exactamente lo que estaba ocurriendo. Tal vez la carta no había sido descubierta para ofrecer soluciones inmediatas. Tal vez había aparecido para obligar a todos a enfrentar preguntas que durante demasiado tiempo habían evitado. Sí, era así. Entonces, el proceso apenas estaba comenzando porque las preguntas más difíciles aún estaban por llegar. Y precisamente cuando León XIV comenzaba a comprender esa realidad, llegó una noticia inesperada. Una noticia que sorprendió incluso a algunos de sus asesores más cercanos. Una noticia relacionada con el encuentro que estaba por comenzar y que haría que toda la atención se concentrara nuevamente en la antigua profecía, porque por primera vez algo estaba ocurriendo que parecía coincidir con sus palabras de música, una forma casi imposible de explicar. La noticia llegó al Vaticano temprano en la mañana. Al principio parecía un informe más. Música, uno de tantos documentos que llegaban diariamente a los despachos de Roma. Pero esta vez era diferente, muy diferente. Cuando el Papa León XIV terminó de leerlo, permaneció en silencio. Durante varios segundos no dijo una sola palabra. Los asesores presentes intercambiaron miradas. Percibían inmediatamente la gravedad del momento, porque el informe contenía algo inesperado, algo que nadie había anticipado. Un grupo de importantes representantes cristianos, música, que durante años habían evitado participar en ciertos diálogos, estaba mostrando disposición para asistir a las futuras conversaciones. No era un compromiso definitivo, no era una garantía, pero sí era un cambio significativo y precisamente por eso llamó tanto la atención. León XIV volvió a leer el documento, luego una segunda vez y después una tercera. La noticia era real. La puerta seguía abierta, quizá más abierta de lo que había estado durante años. Mientras tanto, en distintos lugares del mundo, otros líderes religiosos comenzaban a reaccionar. Algunos expresaban optimismo, otros mantenían cautela, pero todos reconocían que algo estaba cambiando, algo que pocos meses antes parecía improbable. La posibilidad de un diálogo más amplio comenzaba a parecer alcanzable. Sin embargo, el Papa sabía que las oportunidades también podían desaparecer. La historia estaba llena de ejemplos, momentos prometedores que terminaron perdiéndose por desconfianza, por miedo, música por impaciencia, por orgullo. Precisamente por eso seguía actuando con extrema prudencia. Esa misma tarde volvió a abrir la carta de Sorusía, quería revisar una vez más los últimos párrafos. Y fue entonces cuando encontró una frase que parecía conectarse directamente con la noticia que acababa de recibir. Las palabras decían: «Cuando la esperanza parezca pequeña, no la desprecien, porque las puertas más grandes comienzan con aperturas diminutas». El Papa permaneció observando aquellas líneas. Eran simples pero profundas, porque describían perfectamente lo que estaba ocurriendo. Nadie hablaba todavía de una reconciliación completa. Nadie prometía soluciones inmediatas, pero existían señales, pequeñas señales, música, y a veces las señales pequeñas son las más importantes. Mientras tanto, el cardenal Burke también recibía informes sobre las nuevas reacciones internacionales. Estudió cuidadosamente, reconocía el valor del diálogo, reconocía la importancia de escuchar, pero seguía convencido de que el entusiasmo no debía reemplazar al discernimiento. Por eso continuó insistiendo en la necesidad de actuar con sabiduría, con paciencia, con fidelidad a los principios fundamentales de la fe. La situación seguía siendo compleja, mucho más compleja de lo que la mayoría imaginaba, porque detrás de cada declaración pública existían décadas de historia, siglos de diferencias y generaciones enteras marcadas por la separación. Aún así, algo estaba cambiando y todos comenzaban a percibirlo: los periodistas, los teólogos, los líderes religiosos, incluso quienes permanecían escépticos. Había una sensación creciente de música, que la historia estaba entrando en una nueva etapa, pero también existía otra sensación, una más inquietante, la sensación de que los momentos más difíciles todavía no habían llegado, porque la profecía hablaba constantemente de una prueba que aún no se había manifestado por completo, y cuanto más avanzaban los acontecimientos, más cerca parecía estar. Los días siguieron avanzando, y con cada jornada que pasaba, la expectativa crecía. Las conversaciones preparatorias continuaban, los informes seguían llegando, y el interés internacional alcanzaba niveles que pocos habían imaginado al comienzo de toda aquella historia. El Papa León XIV observaba cuidadosamente cada música, movimiento, cada respuesta, cada señal. Sabía que estaba entrando en una etapa decisiva, una etapa donde las palabras tendrían consecuencias y donde cada decisión sería observada por millones de personas. Música. Mientras tanto, el cardenal Burke seguía manteniendo reuniones privadas con diversos líderes eclesiales. Escuchaba atentamente, preguntaba, analizaba. Vi aunque seguía expresando reservaza. También comprendía que los acontecimientos estaban adquiriendo una dimensión cada vez mayor. La conversación ya no podía detenerse. La cuestión era cómo conducirla, no si debía existir, sino cómo debía desarrollarse. Aquella diferencia era importante, muy importante, porque demostraba que incluso quienes tenían preocupaciones legítimas reconocían la importancia del momento. Una tarde, León XIV recibió un informe especialmente significativo. Música. El documento contenía un resumen de reacciones procedentes de diferentes tradiciones cristianas. Algunas respuestas eran cautelosas, otras positivas, algunas incluso sorprendentemente optimistas, pero había un elemento común: la disposición a escuchar, y eso llamó profundamente su atención, música, porque durante mucho tiempo, incluso la disposición a escuchar había parecido imposible. Ahora, aunque música, las diferencias seguían existiendo, el diálogo comenzaba a parecer alcanzable, no garantizado, pero posible. Esa noche volvió a abrir la carta. Quedaban pocas páginas por revisar, pocas líneas por analizar, y sin embargo, parecían contener el peso de toda la historia. Mientras avanzaba lentamente por el texto, encontró otro fragmento. Las palabras decían: «Muchos buscarán una victoria, pero el cielo buscará una reconciliación». León X permaneció largo tiempo contemplando aquella frase porque resumía perfectamente el desafío. Las personas suelen pensar en términos de victoria y derrota, de ganadores y perdedores, pero la reconciliación exige algo diferente. exige humildad, exige sacrificio, exige la voluntad de comprender incluso aquello que resulta difícil de aceptar, y precisamente por eso era tan complicada. Mientras tanto, fuera del Vaticano, las discusiones seguían intensificándose. Algunos observadores comenzaban a hablar de un momento histórico, otros advertían sobre posibles decepciones y muchos simplemente esperaban. Esperaban para ver qué ocurriría cuando finalmente comenzaran las conversaciones oficiales. La presión aumentaba, pero también aumentaba la esperanza. Dos fuerzas avanzando al mismo tiempo, dos emociones coexistiendo dentro de una misma historia, y quizá eso era exactamente lo que la carta había intentado describir. Porque cuanto más se acercaban los acontecimientos decisivos, más evidente resultaba que el futuro seguía abierto. Nada estaba escrito, nada estaba garantizado. Todo dependía de las decisiones que las personas eligieran tomar. Sin embargo, quedaba una última advertencia. Una advertencia que todavía no había sido comprendida completamente y que estaba escondida en las páginas finales de la carta. Una advertencia que pronto haría que tanto el Papa León XIV como el cardenal Burke observaran toda la situación desde una perspectiva completamente diferente, porque la prueba más importante aún no había llegado. Y cuando finalmente apareciera, todos comprenderían por qué Sor Lucía, había insistido en mantener aquellas palabras ocultas durante más de 80 años. La noche era silenciosa en el Vaticano, demasiado silenciosa. El Papa León XIV permanecía solo en su estudio, observando las últimas páginas de la carta que había cambiado por completo el rumbo de su pontificado. Durante semanas había estudiado cada palabra, cada frase, cada advertencia, y ahora había llegado al final, o al menos eso creía, porque al revisar nuevamente el documento, descubrió algo inesperado, una pequeña anotación escrita en el margen inferior, tan tenue, que había pasado desapercibida durante todas las lecturas anteriores. La tinta estaba desgastada, casi borrada por el paso del tiempo, pero aún podía leerse. León XIV acercó lentamente la hoja a la lámpara y comenzó a descifrar las palabras. Lo que leyó hizo que permaneciera inmóvil. La nota decía: la división visible no será la prueba final. La verdadera prueba será la división de los corazones. El Papa volvió a leerla, y luego otra vez aquella frase parecía contener el núcleo de todo el mensaje, porque durante semanas todos habían hablado de estructuras, de instituciones, de historia, de teología, pero la carta estaba apuntando hacia algo mucho más profundo. Los corazones, las intenciones, las actitudes, la capacidad de escuchar, la capacidad de perdonar, la capacidad de confiar. Tal vez el verdadero problema nunca había sido únicamente la separación entre iglesias. Tal vez la raíz de todos estaba en otro lugar. Mientras reflexionaba sobre ello, recordó las conversaciones de las últimas semanas, las preocupaciones de Burke, las esperanzas de sus asesores, las expectativas de millones de personas, y comprendió algo importante. Muchos estaban concentrados en quién tendría razón. Pocos estaban concentrados en cómo sanar, y esa diferencia podía cambiarlo todo. Mientras tanto, el cardenal Burke también atravesaba un periodo de profunda reflexión. Habías seguido cuidadosamente cada acontecimiento, cada declaración, cada reacción B. Aunque mantenía sus reservas, comenzaba a percibir algo que antes no había visto con claridad. La situación ya no giraba únicamente alrededor de cuestiones doctrinales. También giraba alrededor de la forma en que las personas respondían a esas cuestiones. El tono, la actitud, la disposición a escuchar. Elementos que a menudo determinan el resultado de cualquier diálogo. Aquella misma semana recibió mensajes de diferentes partes del mundo. Algunos le pedían firmeza, otros conciliación, algunos apoyo, otros oposición. Cuanto más escuchaba, más comprendía la complejidad del momento, porque incluso entre personas que compartían la misma fe, existían interpretaciones distintas sobre el camino a seguir. La tensión seguía creciendo, pero también crecía la conciencia de que algo importante estaba en juego, algo que iba mucho más allá de una simple discusión. Mientras tanto, las últimas preparaciones para el gran encuentro continuaban avanzando. Las agendas estaban casi completas, los participantes confirmados, los documentos preparatorios distribuidos. Todo parecía acercarse inexorablemente hacia el momento decisivo. Y sin embargo, la carta seguía música, insistiendo en la misma advertencia. La verdadera prueba aún no había llegado. La verdadera prueba sería interior, una prueba relacionada con el miedo, con el orgullo, con la capacidad de reconocer la verdad, incluso cuando resultara incómoda. Y cuanto más pensaba León catorrose en aquellas palabras, más comprendía por qué Sor Lucía había mantenido el documento oculto durante tanto tiempo. Reactions were not long in coming. Some celebrated the initiative, considering it a historic opportunity, a brave step, a sign of hope. Others responded with caution, recalling that the challenges accumulated over centuries could not be resolved easily. There were also those who expressed concern, fearing that the process could generate new tensions. Cardinal Burke carefully observed everything that was taking place. He read the full statement several times, and although he acknowledged the moderate tone of the text, he still maintained his reservations. He knew that many people would expect to hear his opinion, but he decided to act with prudence. It was not yet the time to respond, not yet. Meanwhile, Pope Leo XIV returned to his private study. On his desk, Sister Lucia's letter still rested. He took it into his hands once more and opened to one of the final pages. There, he found another phrase that seemed to speak directly to the moment he was living. When the door opens, the world will watch. Many will seek immediate answers, but the truth moves slower than the crowd. Leo XIV remained contemplating those words because they described the situation exactly. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted conclusions. Everyone wanted to know how the story would end. But important processes rarely move at the pace of human impatience. Reconciliation required time, understanding required time, and trust required even more time. That same night, messages began arriving from different countries. Bishops, patriarchs, theologians, and representatives of various Christian traditions. Some expressed support, others simply expressed interest, but all recognized that something significant was occurring. For the first time in a long time, the conversation about Christian unity occupied the center of world attention, and that was impossible to ignore. However, as reactions continued to multiply, a new question began to emerge. A question that would soon dominate every debate. For now that the convocation was official, everyone wanted to know the same thing. What position would Cardinal Raymond Burke finally adopt? And according to the ancient prophecy, the answer to that question could change everything. The question began repeating everywhere. In the corridors of the Vatican, on religious analysis programs, in Catholic universities, in parish communities, and also in Orthodox circles that closely observed what was happening. What would Cardinal Raymond Burke do? For until that moment, he had expressed his concerns, insisted on the need for prudence, and defended the importance of doctrinal clarity. Yet, he had not yet responded directly to the Pope's convocation, and his silence was beginning to generate even more speculation. Meanwhile, Leo XIV moved forward with preparations. He knew that the coming weeks would be decisive, not only for the meeting he was organizing, but also for the general climate within the Church. Every word spoken, every statement published, and every public reaction could influence the future of the process. Therefore, he continued to act with calm, avoiding unnecessary controversies and maintaining his focus on dialogue. Outside the Vatican, however, the debate kept growing. Some commentators affirmed that the meeting could become a historic moment comparable to other major ecclesial events. Others warned that expectations were too high, and that disappointment could be immense if the results failed to fulfill what many imagined. In the midst of those discussions, the response everyone was waiting for finally appeared. A public letter signed by Cardinal Burke. The document was respectful, carefully drafted, and deeply reflective, but it was also firm. Burke began by reaffirming his love for the Church, his respect for the Petrine ministry, and his sincere desire to see unity strengthened among Christians. However, he added a warning. Authentic unity, he wrote, could not be built by sacrificing the clarity of the faith. It could not rest upon ambiguities, nor could it arise from hasty interpretations motivated by the pressure of the moment. The letter was published and disseminated rapidly. Reactions arrived almost immediately. Some celebrated it, others criticized it, but practically everyone agreed on one point. Burke's position had been made clear. He was not rejecting dialogue, but he was not willing to accept just any path toward reconciliation either. That statement had an enormous impact, as it confirmed that differences remained present, and that the impending debate would be much deeper than many had imagined. When Leo XIV read the letter, he remained thoughtful. He found no hostility, no personal attacks. He found conviction, and precisely for that reason, he understood the importance of the moment. The people involved in this story were not adversaries. They were men who deeply loved the Church, and precisely because of that love, they saw certain issues differently. The situation was more complex than the headlines could show. Much more complex. That night, the Pope reread the final lines of Sister Lucia's letter once more, and a phrase caught his attention again. A phrase that seemed to acquire an increasingly profound meaning. Sincere hearts will not always walk the same path, but the truth will reveal its fruits with time. Leo XIV slowly closed the document. Those words reminded him of something important. Not all differences meant enmity. Not all opposition meant bad intention, and not every crisis ended in division. Sometimes, crises could also become opportunities. Opportunities to listen, to learn, and to grow. However, the true test had not yet arrived, because the meeting convened by Rome was drawing closer and closer, and when it finally began, conversations would cease to be theoretical. Questions would have to be faced directly, and future decisions would begin to take shape. It was then that it would be discovered whether the door opened by the prophecy would lead toward reconciliation or toward a new wound. The countdown had begun. Every passing day brought the Church closer to the gathering convened by Pope Leo XIV. What had initially seemed like a simple initiative for dialogue was transforming into something much larger. Something that drew the attention of believers, theologians, journalists, and religious leaders around the world. Rome was preparing to receive visitors from numerous countries. Preliminary conversations were already underway. Working teams were organizing meetings, experts were exchanging documents, and expectations kept rising. Meanwhile, Pope Leo XIV observed it all with a mixture of hope and concern. Hope because he saw signs of openness, concern because he also saw signs of tension. He knew both realities coexisted, and he knew that ignoring either of them would be a mistake. Cardinal Burke was also continuing his preparations. He had decided to participate actively in the conversations, not to block them nor to sabotage them, but to ensure that the issues he considered essential were heard. Many interpreted his decision as a positive sign. Others continued to see a potential conflict on the horizon. But one thing was evident. Burke had no intention of remaining on the sidelines, and that guaranteed the debate would be profound. As preparations progressed, new discussions began to emerge within various ecclesial circles. Some asked what unity truly meant. Others debated how it should be constructed, and many agreed that true reconciliation required something more than formal agreements. It required trust, and trust was precisely what had suffered the most over the centuries. The Pope understood that reality perfectly, which was why he constantly insisted on the need to listen, not only to speak, not only to teach, not only to convince, to listen. For he was convinced that many wounds remained open precisely because the parties had stopped listening to each other. One afternoon, he received a new report regarding international participation. The document was extensive and contained news he considered encouraging. Several major figures from the Christian world had officially confirmed their interest in closely following the process. Some had even agreed to participate in certain preparatory meetings. Leo XIV observed those names in silence. Each confirmation represented an opportunity, a small opportunity, but an opportunity nonetheless. Yet he also knew that opportunities could be lost. History was full of squandered occasions, moments when fear had prevailed over hope, moments when mistrust had proven stronger than dialogue. Precisely for that reason, he opened Sister Lucia's letter once more, and once again he found words that seemed to speak directly to the situation he was experiencing. The door will remain open only for a time. Many will doubt, many will wait too long, and some will understand too late. The Pope remained motionless for several seconds. Those phrases carried a special force, reminding him that opportunities do not last forever, that important decisions cannot be postponed indefinitely, and that sometimes history demands action before it is too late. Meanwhile, outside the Vatican, public attention kept growing. Every new report generated more questions. Every new statement prompted more analysis. An expectation reached levels few had imagined months prior. Yet amidst all that attention, there was one question that began to worry several observers in particular. It was not unity, nor theology, nor even the prophecy. It was something simpler. What would happen if the conversations failed? What would happen if, after all the hope generated, the differences proved too deep? It was an uncomfortable question, a question no one wanted to answer, but one that was beginning to appear with increasing frequency. And according to the final lines of the mysterious letter, the answer to that question could determine the future of the entire story. The question began to spread silently, first among analysts, then among theologians, then among specialized journalists, and finally among the participants of the process themselves. What would happen if everything failed? It was a possibility no one wished to consider, but one that could no longer be ignored. For the closer the gathering convened by Pope Leo XIV drew, the more evident the magnitude of the challenge became. It was not simply a matter of organizing meetings, exchanging speeches, or signing documents. It was about confronting a wound that had been open for nearly 1,000 years, and ancient wounds rarely disappear easily. The Pope understood that reality better than anyone. That was why he kept insisting on patience, humility, and the need to listen before judging. However, pressure continued to grow, expectations were immense, and excessive expectations can easily turn into disappointment. Meanwhile, Cardinal Burke observed the unfolding events attentively, sharing some of those concerns. He knew that enthusiasm could be dangerous when transformed into impatience, for profound issues are not resolved through passing emotions. They require time, study, discernment, and fidelity. That was why he continued to advocate for prudence, even when others asked for faster progress. One afternoon, while reviewing Sister Lucia's letter again, Leo XIV reached one of the final passages of the document, a brief yet deeply unsettling fragment. The words read, "The wound can heal. But first, it must be fully acknowledged, and many will discover that it is deeper than they imagined." The Pope spent a long time observing those lines because he understood exactly what they meant. For centuries, different generations had tried to resolve divisions, but perhaps they had never fully faced all their causes, all their consequences, and all their accumulated pain. Perhaps that was precisely why reconciliation remained so difficult. It was not enough to talk about the future. It was also necessary to understand the past. And understanding the past demanded courage. More courage than many people were willing to admit. Meanwhile, news kept arriving from different parts of the world, some encouraging, others concerning, some reflecting hope, others showing skepticism, but all confirming the same reality. The Christian world was watching every step, every word, and every decision. Attention was immense, and with it, responsibility grew as well. That night, Leo XIV walked alone through one of the Vatican's inner gardens. The air was calm, the lights gently illuminated the paths, and for a few moments he was able to step away from the constant noise surrounding the situation. As he walked, he recalled something he had learned many years ago. Great transformations rarely begin with answers. They almost always begin with questions, difficult, uncomfortable, but necessary questions. And perhaps that was exactly what was taking place. Perhaps the letter had not been discovered to offer immediate solutions. Perhaps it had appeared to force everyone to face questions they had avoided for far too long. If that was the case, then the process was only just beginning, for the most difficult questions were yet to come. And precisely as Leo XIV began to understand that reality, an unexpected piece of news arrived, news that surprised even some of his closest advisors, news related to the encounter about to begin that would focus all attention back on the ancient prophecy. For the first time, something was taking place that seemed to coincide with its words in a way that was almost impossible to explain. The news reached the Vatican early in the morning. At first, it seemed like just another report, one of many documents arriving daily at the offices in Rome. But this time it was different. Very different. When Pope Leo XIV finished reading it, he remained silent. For several seconds, he did not say a single word. The advisors present exchanged glances, immediately perceiving the gravity of the moment, for the report contained something unexpected, something no one had anticipated. A group of major Christian representatives who for years had avoided participating in certain dialogues was showing a willingness to attend the upcoming conversations. It was not a definitive commitment, nor a guarantee, but it was a significant shift, and precisely for that reason, it drew so much attention. Leo XIV read the document again, then a second time, and then a third. The news was real. The door remained open, perhaps more open than it had been in years. Meanwhile, in various places around the world, other religious leaders began to react. Some expressed optimism, others maintained caution, but all recognized that something was changing, something that just months earlier had seemed improbable. The possibility of a broader dialogue was beginning to appear achievable. However, the Pope knew that opportunities could also disappear. History was full of examples, promising moments that ended up lost through mistrust, fear, impatience, or pride. Precisely for that reason, he continued to act with extreme prudence. That same afternoon, he opened Sister Lucia's letter once more to review the final paragraphs. And it was then that he found a phrase that seemed to connect directly with the news he had just received. When hope seems small, do not despise it, for the largest doors begin with tiny openings. The Pope remained observing those lines. They were simple yet profound, describing perfectly what was occurring. No one was yet talking about a complete reconciliation. No one was promising immediate solutions. But there were signs, small signs, and sometimes small signs are the most important. Meanwhile, Cardinal Burke also received reports regarding the new international reactions. He studied them carefully, recognizing the value of dialogue and the importance of listening, yet remaining convinced that enthusiasm should not replace discernment. Therefore, he continued to insist on the need to act with wisdom, patience, and fidelity to the fundamental principles of the faith. The situation remained complex, much more complex than most imagined, because behind every public statement lay decades of history, centuries of differences, and entire generations marked by separation. Even so, something was changing, and everyone was beginning to perceive it. Journalists, theologians, religious leaders, even those who remained skeptical. There was a growing sense that history was entering a new stage. But there was also another, more unsettling feeling, the sense that the most difficult moments had not yet arrived, for the prophecy spoke constantly of a test that had not yet fully manifested, and the further events progressed, the closer it seemed to be. Days kept passing, and with each passing day, expectation grew. Preparatory conversations continued, reports kept arriving, and international interest reached levels few had imagined at the beginning of the story. Pope Leo XIV closely observed every move, every response, and every sign. He knew he was entering a decisive stage, a stage where words would carry consequences, and where every decision would be watched by millions of people. Meanwhile, Cardinal Burke continued holding private meetings with various ecclesial leaders. He listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and weighed every perspective with care. Although he maintained his deep reservations, he could no longer deny that events were rapidly taking on a far greater dimension. The conversation could no longer be halted. The real question now was not whether it should happen, but how it should be guided, with wisdom, charity, and fidelity to the truth. That distinction mattered deeply to him. It showed that even those with sincere concerns recognized the gravity of the moment and the need to engage, rather than withdraw. One afternoon, Leo XIV received a particularly meaningful report summarizing reactions from different Christian traditions. Some responses were cautious and measured, others quietly positive, and a few surprisingly hopeful. Yet a common thread ran through them all, a willingness to listen. For the Pope, this simple fact carried profound emotional weight. For many years, even the openness to genuine dialogue had felt distant and unlikely. Now, though differences remained sharp, real conversation seemed within reach, not assured, but truly possible. The thought brought him a quiet sense of encouragement, mixed with solemn responsibility. That night, he opened the letter once more. Only a few pages remained, yet they seemed to bear the accumulated weight of centuries. As he read slowly, one fragment in particular held him captive. Many will seek a victory, but heaven will seek a reconciliation. Leo XIV lingered over those words for a long time, his heart heavy with their truth. Human nature so often framed matters in terms of winning and losing, of triumph or defeat. True reconciliation, however, demanded something far more difficult: humility, sacrifice, and the courage to understand even what one finds painful to accept. He felt the full challenge of that call in his own spirit. Outside the Vatican walls, discussions continued to intensify. Some voices spoke excitedly of a historic turning point, while others cautioned against possible disappointment. Many simply waited in watchful silence, wondering what would unfold once official conversations began in earnest. Pressure mounted steadily, yet so did a fragile thread of hope. Two powerful forces advancing side by side within the same unfolding story. And perhaps that tension was exactly what the letter had sought to describe. As the decisive moments drew nearer, it became increasingly clear that the future remained open. Nothing was predetermined, nothing guaranteed. Everything would depend on the choices, the charity, and the courage of those involved. Still, one final warning lay ahead, hidden in the closing pages of the letter, not yet fully grasped. A warning that would soon compel both Pope Leo XIV and Cardinal Burke to see the entire situation in a dramatically different light. For the greatest test had not yet arrived. When it finally came, everyone would begin to understand why Sister Lucia had felt compelled to keep those words sealed for more than 80 years. The night was quiet in the Vatican. Too quiet. Pope Leo XIV sat alone in his study, observing the final pages of the letter that had completely altered the course of his pontificate. For weeks, he had studied every word, every phrase, and every warning. And now he had reached the end, or so he thought, for upon reviewing the document once more, he discovered something unexpected, a small note written in the bottom margin, so faint that it had gone unnoticed during all previous readings. The ink was faded, almost erased by the passage of time, but it could still be read. Leo XIV slowly brought the page closer to the lamp and began to decipher the words. What he read made him freeze. The note read, "The visible division will not be the final test. The true test will be the division of hearts." The Pope read it again, and then once more. That phrase seemed to contain the core of the entire message. For weeks, everyone had spoken of structures, institutions, history, and theology, but the letter was pointing towards something much deeper. Hearts, intentions, attitudes, the capacity to listen, the capacity to forgive, and the capacity to trust. Perhaps the real problem had never been solely the separation between churches. Perhaps the root of it all lay elsewhere. As he reflected on it, he remembered the conversations of recent weeks, Burke's concerns, his advisors' hopes, and the expectations of millions of people. He understood something crucial. Many were focused on who was right. Few were focused on how to heal. And that difference could change everything. Meanwhile, Cardinal Burke was also going through a period of deep reflection. He had closely followed every event, statement, and reaction. And although he maintained his reservations, he began to perceive something he had not clearly seen before. The situation no longer revolved solely around doctrinal matters. It also revolved around the way people responded to those matters, the tone, the attitude, the willingness to listen. Elements that often determine the outcome of any dialogue. That same week, he received messages from different parts of the world. Some asked him for firmness, others for conciliation. Some offered support, others urged opposition. The more he listened, the more he understood the complexity of the moment. For even among people who shared the same faith, distinct interpretations existed regarding the path to follow. Tension kept growing, but so did the awareness that something important was at stake, something far transcending a simple debate. Meanwhile, final preparations for the great gathering kept moving forward. Agendas were nearly complete, participants confirmed, and preparatory documents distributed. Everything seemed to be drawing inexorably toward the decisive moment. And yet, the letter kept insisting on the same warning. The true test had not yet arrived. The true test would be internal, a test related to fear, pride, and the capacity to recognize truth, even when uncomfortable. And the more Leo XIV thought about those words, the better he understood why Sister Lucia had kept the document hidden for so long. It was not a prophecy about events. It was a prophecy about people, about decisions, about hearts. And precisely for that reason, it was so difficult to interpret, yet so difficult to ignore. Now, only a few days remained before the meeting began. And with every passing hour, a question grew more urgent. Were they truly prepared for what was to come? The final days before the encounter arrived faster than many expected. After weeks of preparation, analysis, and expectation, the moment was practically upon them. Rome began to fill with visitors, bishops, theologians, representatives of distinct Christian traditions, observers, and advisors. All arrived with questions, expectations, and concerns. The atmosphere was solemn, yet charged with uncertainty, for no one knew exactly what might emerge from those conversations. Meanwhile, Pope Leo XIV dedicated every free moment to prayer and reflection. He had come too far to act impulsively. He knew that any words spoken over the coming days would be carefully examined, interpreted, analyzed, and debated. That was why he continued seeking clarity. Not popularity, not approval, but clarity. The same clarity he had sought from the moment he opened Sister Lucia's letter. That night, he reread the final lines, the absolute end, and found a phrase that seemed to summarize the entire message. The words read, "Do not fear the truth. Fear only forgetting charity." The Pope remained motionless, immediately understanding the depth of that warning. Truth was essential. It always would be. But so was charity, and when one of the two vanished, something vital was lost. Perhaps that had been the problem for centuries. Sincere people defending sincere convictions, but sometimes forgetting to listen, forgetting to understand, and forgetting to walk together. As he reflected upon it, he received a late-breaking report containing details about the confirmed participants. Among the names appeared one that caught his special attention: Cardinal Raymond Burke. His participation had been officially confirmed. Leo XIV observed the document for several seconds, then smiled faintly, for he understood something important. Despite all the differences, despite all the concerns, Burke had decided to be present. He had decided to participate. He had decided to be part of the conversation, and that carried enormous significance. Meanwhile, Burke himself was preparing to travel to Rome. He had dedicated much time to studying, praying, and reflecting. He knew that the encounter would be important, perhaps more important than many imagined. And although he still held reservations, he also understood that he could not limit himself to observing from a distance. He had to be there. He had to listen. He had to participate. Events were entering their decisive phase. The positions were already known, the questions had already been formulated, and now the moment had arrived to face them directly. And as the Christian world watched, with growing attention, a feeling began to spread among those who knew the entire story. The sense that the prophecy was approaching its conclusion, not because all the answers had appeared, but because the moment had finally arrived to make decisions, real decisions, difficult decisions, decisions that could influence future generations. And according to the final words written by Sister Lucia, it would be precisely at that moment when each person would have to choose what they were willing to put first, fear or hope. The day finally arrived. After months of rumors, weeks of preparation, and decades of a hidden letter waiting to be discovered, the conversations began. Representatives from distinct Christian traditions took their places: theologians, bishops, advisors, observers, all aware that they were participating in something extraordinary. Not because they expected to resolve 1,000 years of history in a few days, but because they were willing to try. Pope Leo XIV opened the gathering with simple words. He did not speak of victories, he did not speak of defeats, nor did he speak of winners or losers. He spoke of listening, he spoke of humility, and he spoke of the need to search together for that which unites, without ignoring that which still separates. The room remained in silence, and for a moment it seemed as though everyone understood the magnitude of that instant. Among those present was Cardinal Raymond Burke, listening attentively, observing, and reflecting. When his turn came to speak, his words were firm, but also respectful. He recalled the importance of truth, the need for doctrinal clarity, and the responsibility to remain faithful to the faith received. Many nodded. Others took notes, but one thing caught everyone's attention. His tone was not one of confrontation, but one of conviction, and precisely for that reason, his words were listened to carefully. The conversations continued for hours, stretching into days. There were moments of genuine agreement, sharp disagreements, periods of palpable tension, and unexpected glimmers of hope. Precisely the kind of emotional ebb and flow that arises when sincere people confront deep and difficult questions. No one received everything they hoped for, and no one departed with complete answers. Yet something meaningful took place, something many had long thought impossible. People remained at the table, kept talking, kept listening, and continued searching for common ground, despite their differences. One night, after the sessions had drawn to a close, Pope Leo XIV returned quietly to his private study. Sister Lucia's letter still lay on the desk, the very document that had set this entire journey in motion. He picked it up one final time and reread the very last sentence, the words carefully inscribed at the bottom of the page. Unity will not arrive when everyone thinks alike. It will arrive when they learn to walk together without ceasing to seek the truth. The Pope sat in silence for a long while, letting the words settle deeply into his heart. He understood at last that the letter had never been a detailed prediction of specific events, nor a simple instruction manual, nor a miraculous solution to heal 1,000 years of division. It was, above all, an invitation to choose between fear and hope, between pride and humility, between rejection and genuine listening. Perhaps that was why it had remained hidden for more than 80 years, because each generation must face that same choice anew, without easy answers or shortcuts, relying instead on faith, patience, and the quiet courage of the human heart. Outside the Vatican, the world continued to watch. The differences between traditions did not vanish overnight, and the old wounds did not heal in a single moment. History moved forward as it always had. Yet something subtle had shifted. The conversation had truly begun, and in the long story of humanity, The simple act of beginning to speak and listen with open hearts can itself mark a quiet but profound victory. As night fell gently over Rome, the distant bells of St. Peter's Basilica rang softly through the evening air. Pope Leo XIV slowly closed the letter, returned it with care to its protective case, and turned his gaze toward the crucifix on the wall. In that quiet moment, he sensed what Sister Lucia might have understood so many decades earlier, that the greatest battles are often not waged between people, but within the human heart. How we respond to those inner struggles can shape the future in ways we may never fully comprehend. What would you have done if you had uncovered such a message hidden for generations? Do you believe that unity, however imperfect, can still emerge after 1,000 years of separation? The questions linger, inviting each of us to reflect in our own way,